incredibly important topic. It's not only an important topic for South Africa, it's an important topic for food security as well as for the more equal and fair distribution of assets in South Africa. We have a number of challenges, but one of the major challenges is around food, poverty, as well as the massive gap between those that have and those that unfortunately does not have for various reasons. Now, a successful food producer, no matter the size, is an asset to the community. It's an asset to the country, but when I say asset to the community, it plays a critical role not only in being self-sufficient, but also in assisting the community around them to become food secure, to play a role in developing the eco-infrastructure that it operates in. And here I want to just look a bit about the developmental aspect of that. Remember, development and developmental aspects are not a zero-sum game. It is simply a game or a transaction where everybody that adds value to the people around them. So the more we can get sectors, the more we can get people developed into a financial viable situation, the bigger the snowball becomes. And for me, the most important aspect of these discussions is how do we get the snowball rolling? How do we get the snowball bigger? Because in the end, the bigger the snowball, the more people is included in the South African economy and the more people will share in the success of these assets. And I do believe that we must cherish and we must cultivate smaller new entrants into the food production chain to make them bigger players so they can become assets to the South African economy. If we are going to solve the problem of poverty, the problem of land redistribution and land utilization, South Africa will become a successful country. And therefore, I'm passionate about these kind of sessions, about these ventures, and I think it's critically important for all of us. So I hope you all have a great summit. I hope you all can take from this, that we can learn from this, and that we can take this forward as part of becoming a successful food producing nation, where more people is involved in this progress and where we get this snowball to roll and roll and roll and become bigger and bigger. So with no further ado, I'm going to start by introducing the chairperson of Beyond COVID, Advocate Faye McAdam, to you. Now, Faye has got a distinguished career, not only in terms of her academic qualification, but in terms of her business acumen. Faye is a chartered director and an advocate of the High Court of South Africa. And as a commercial lawyer, Faye focused specifically on cross-border mergers, acquisitions, and transaction advisory services. Now, some of her highlight includes the CEO of Abafazi iAfrica and the founding chief executive officer of 4AX Exchange, one of the newly established stock exchanges in South Africa. Faye established Themis Investments, which is a black female-owned private investment holding company, and Conscious Capital, a majority black female-owned corporate finance boutique firm specializing in social and impact investments across the continent. So I would like to introduce Advocate Faye McAdam, specifically today as the chairperson of Beyond COVID and the chairperson of the board of directors of Beyond COVID. So Faye, with no further ado, thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this session. I'm terribly excited. I believe this is a core building block for a successful future South Africa. And I do think there is specifically responsibility for everybody in South Africa, being in the financial services, being in current structured agriculture or formal agriculture, to be part of this. So Faye, I look forward to your words. Over to you, Faye.
Thank you, Theo. And let me just say that that was an excellent context introduction. I first of all just want to thank everybody for taking the time out to join us this morning. It's not just about listening to the talking heads, although that's important as we go through the agenda, but rather when we are looking looking at the breakaway sessions and those roundtable discussions for us to jointly come up with tangible next steps in terms of the difference that we can make, especially within the context of Theo's introductory comments. So what I want to do in the 5 minutes that I have available is really just give you some background and introduce Beyond COVID to you. So I've got a few slides. Some of you might have seen them before already. So I just want to refresh your memory or introduce Beyond COVID to those who are not aware of its existence. Next slide, please. So based on the pandemic, the global pandemic, and everything that we've experienced, and there has been some devastating consequences in the aftermath of the pandemic, not just in terms of lives lost and personal human tragedy, but also the huge and distressing economic impact that has been felt globally. If we just look at South Africa, it's long been known to us that the SME contribution to our economy is going to be the largest driver in terms of our GDP and contributor to that GDP by 2025. That means if we have any hope of stabilizing our economy, that we need to do things differently. Now, there's nothing about the statistics or the context in which we operate that is unknown to anybody, but it's just about why we haven't for the last few decades been able to actually respond unequivocally to the challenges that have been presented. So we've seen that the pandemic didn't necessarily introduce anything new, but actually what it did do is it surfaced the fault lines that were lying underpinning our economy very starkly for us, and also then allowed us maybe to hone in on what the responses and the potential solutions would be. If you look at the slide, it shows very nicely, and I'm sure that the team will be able to share the slides if anybody is interested in it. This is some of the results that we got from the first round of surveys and research that we did last year. And you'll see just two things to highlight here from this. The one is obviously that we are aligned in terms of the National Development Plan and what the government focus areas are. But like I said earlier, the greatest contributor is going to come from the SMMEs and that environment. And yet you can see that the shortfall in terms of where the resources, government resources and government attention is allocated falls hopelessly short in terms of us making a difference. And so we need to think about what is it that we are going to do so that we ensure not just a pipeline in terms of economic contribution and money moving through the economy, but that will obviously lead to job creation, job security, and generally a better life for all. Next slide, please, Sage. So in response to these, and they are catastrophic survey results that we received last year, we put our heads together with some of the joint founders of Beyond COVID, whom you'll meet throughout the morning, and said, what is it that we can do differently? And based on the research that a lot of the founding team members had already been doing and the work that they had been doing for the last few decades, in fact, especially with the engagement with National Treasury, with the Jobs Fund, with the IDC, the Development Bank, etc., what we really are looking at is how do we repackage and reconstruct what we need to get all the players around the table so that we can actually fulfill this mission and this vision. So like I said earlier, there's nothing unique or brand spanking new about the thinking, because a lot of good work is being done, but it is very fragmented work. And for some reason, we're not able to gain significant traction if we are to respond to those catastrophic stats that we saw in my previous slide. So the idea behind the Beyond COVID initiative is how do we actually make these SMEs more bankable? How do we de-risk them? And through that, how do we all come together based on our experience and our expertise in this field and make sure that we actually set up a pipeline so that we can strengthen the economy ultimately? Next slide, please, Sage. So in terms of the way that Beyond COVID works, and we're happy, I'm sure that contact details will be shared with all of you later on. We're happy to engage with anybody who would like to be more involved and who would like any additional information on Beyond COVID itself. What we've done, and it's interesting that we're starting off with the Emerging Farmer Summit this morning, because it is this sector specifically, the agri space, where we have taken some of the great learnings and success stories and are using that as the thrust to drive the Beyond COVID initiative. And what that looks at, again, not unique, but repackaging and repurposing, is to look at constructing these SMME collectives, which become the growth vehicles, and through that, where there's a leveraging, there's almost a shared services concept underpinning it, where we make sure that we can put all the collectives that are drawn together in terms of certain commonalities, that through the participants and the partners, the strategic partners in this ecosystem, we can make sure that we put everybody together, we connect them correctly. And whilst we know that historically there's been access to funding, but that hasn't been very successful, and usually the funding that has been accessed hasn't necessarily been through the formal or commercial financial institutions, and it's not always given the SMMEs what they need in terms of growth, supporting their growth trajectory. But we're looking at more than the typical legs of funding, of infrastructure and training, and looking more at step change. So we are talking about market access, we are talking about taking you to the next level, and we're really talking about leveraging the available services that will be offered by the different partners, suppliers, service providers, sponsors, funders, etc., within the ecosystem to the collective. So already through that model, and the team will talk more about it, we are de-risking a single SMME and looking at making them more bankable and obviously more attractive. The key here is that we are not looking at just extending the lifespan of an SMME by a year or 5 years, but making sure that sustainability and value creation is built into this. And of course, that dovetails very nicely with the current discussions around ESG indicators and the manner in which corporate South Africa will be measured going forward. Next slide, please. So in March this year, we had another round of research results that had given us just different insights. And what we had identified then was, where do we allocate our attention, our resources, to make sure that we have the greatest impact within the shortest space of time, based on the Beyond COVID NPC business model, and having already agreed in principle the strategic partnerships with certain of the participants within that ecosystem. You can read the slide for yourself, but essentially the priority sectors that we've identified where we will have the greatest impact is going to be agriculture, construction, and the metals manufacturing sector. And so what we've done in the way that we've constructed Beyond COVID as a system is that we are looking at these three streams and going very deep in terms of what support we can give to putting all the SMMEs together, the single SMMEs within these priority sectors, into the collectives. Before I hand over to the next speaker, for me, what's important about this background and context and how we actually link it to today's summit is, with agriculture, with all our concerns around food security, and yet Africa having great possibility and great potential within the agricultural, agri-processing, etc. value chain, we're saying here that we want to prioritize our first launch in terms of our first pilot project of the collective within the agricultural sector, And the pandemic, the results were quite startling in that they showed that about 63% of commercial farmers had actually regained their post-pandemic operational capability, 63%. By contrast, only 13% of SMMEs in the agricultural space had regained their pre-pandemic operational capability. And that is something that we need to take to heart, and we need to act swiftly if we are going to make a difference in terms of this sector within our economy. Thank you, Theo.
Thank you very much, Faye. I agree with all that you said. I think that we need to be very cognizant of the fact that in the South African context, government cannot, the number of people that's employed by government, fortunately or unfortunately, is at a point where we need the SMMEs, where we need the business sector, where we need the rest of the sector, the informal sector, but we need the rest of the economy to assist in creating jobs, in creating livelihoods, in creating wealth. And I think that is paramount important. Now, before I'm going to introduce Links Naidu and Etienne van Wyk, who are both joint founders of the BeyondCOVID initiative. This is the program for today. You will note that after this, we're going to talk about farmer collectives as a catalyst for recovery. Then we're going to have 5 speakers talking about lessons learned from emerging farmer programs. I think that's going to be incredibly interesting because that is where it actually is practice and where you can actually listen to what exactly happened, what works, and where the challenges are. We are then happy to also announce that we will be awarding 10,000 Rand as a grant to a farmer in a lucky draw. I look forward to that. And then we're going to talk about funding SMME for farmers. And you see there's 3 speakers that will talk from the IDC, Capital Harvest, and the KISB speaker will be Warren Whiteley, specifically talking about Warren Wheatley, apologies for that, talking about various aspects to fund from an SMME side. Then there will be the breakout session where we will talk about solving the bankability questions. We will talk about, as Faye discussed, de-risking and corporatizing communities. And then we're going to talk a bit about the community requirements and aspirations. And we have 3 distinguished traditional leaders. We have 3 chiefs that will join us that are on the line. And I specifically am looking forward to it. And then we're going to discuss the way forward. So that is the program of the day. Our next, I'm going to introduce 2 of the joint founders of the BeyondCOVID initiative. First of all, Links Naidu is a management consulting professional and business entrepreneur with 26 years experience assisting public and private sector organizations to address various business challenges and opportunities. He has an honours degree in computer science from UKZN and a Bachelor of Commerce in Business Management from UNISA. He says that he states, and I tend to agree with him, he's passionate about to contribute to making the world a better place. And with him will be Etienne van Wyk, who's also a co-founder of BeyondCOVID initiative. Etienne van Wyk is a strategy consultant, business transformation specialist, and IT project manager with over 20 years experience. He has a bachelor's degree in industrial engineering from the University of Pretoria. He's foremost a problem solver, searching for simple and pragmatic solutions to complex problems. So Etienne and Links, it's over to you.
Thank you so much, Theo. And thank you for the opportunity to present on what it actually means when we talk about SMME farmer collectives. So if you move on to the next slide. At the end of the day, we want to, as BeyondCOVID, take a very practical perspective on what we mean when we talk about BeyondCOVID assisting the agricultural sector. And if I think about, if we move back to the first slide, so if I think about what it means to be in farming, there are 2 different perspectives here. So we know that we have small farmers, which we sometimes referred to as emerging farmers. And then we have commercial farmers, so the larger operations. We know that both sizes of farming operations are important, critically important to South Africa, given that agriculture is a large contributor to employment. So in terms of numbers of people employed in the sector, we know that agriculture plays a critical role with regards to people having a job and being able to support themselves and their families. Now, when I think of a small farmer, I think about Machimo Holdings, which is a small farm run by a husband and wife team in a small town just outside Kuruman in the Northern Cape. The first time I encountered them, I saw them at a village at a small community stall. They were selling eggs, and in the work that we do, we sat down with them and tried to understand, how we could help them run as a small farm. And what we discovered is, the most amazing passion and energy in everything that they did. And that underlines to me, where the hope is for South Africa with regards to small farmers who are out there with the passion and the energy, making employment happen. What we also discovered, though, is that in their small stall, they lacked a refrigerator, so they couldn't store all of the lettuce they were growing that they wanted to sell, so they were limited in that. They weren't able to secure enough funding to get all of the chickens they wanted to supply the demand that they found they did have for the eggs. And then in terms of the lettuce business, the challenge was that although the SPAR was willing to take their product, they didn't have the volumes and the muscle to negotiate good pricing, and they didn't have the packaging to put a product on the shelf that you and me would buy as opposed to buying something out of Woolworths. So this is, the picture I want you to have in your mind of the small farmer, which I know a lot of us are familiar with. Now, if we move forward to the next slide, think of what a commercial farmer looks like. If I was going to war, this is the kind of machinery I would want. I get that strong, solid feeling. I know that the group of people running this farm, they have the scale to negotiate excellent prices with their suppliers. The price they are paying for fertilizer is much lower than a small farmer would. They would be able to access export markets. So when you're talking about selling pecan nuts to the Chinese, or you're talking about selling lucerne into the Middle East, they would have the scale, be able to commit the quality and the volumes to get into those markets. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't think there's anyone here at the conference that thinks farming is easy. Farming is tough, as business is tough, whether you're a big farmer or a small farmer. But if you're going to choose, you're going to have much more success as a big farmer than a small farmer. So if you think of where South Africa is in the aftermath of COVID, and we know we're not at the end of that road by any stretch of the imagination, we know that SMMEs have lost close to 1 million jobs to date. They expect to lose another 1.2 million jobs in the next 6 months. That's what the BeyondCOVID research indicates. We know that farmers are struggling as well. How do we actually help the farming sector move forward? And that's where the next slide comes in. And this is the concept I want to plant in your minds, because this is really where I think the hope for South Africa in the farming community actually lies. Would it be possible to take the best of commercial farming and the best of smallholder SMME farming and combine them? So if we are going to do that, how do we achieve it? If we look at the support that is provided to the farming community at the moment, to farmers out there, and the support that is provided to SMME farmers in particular, it's very much focused on trying to make a small farmer into a big farmer. And the way in which we do that is we provide training, which is always well-intentioned. We provide support on marketing. We provide access to networking. The challenge with that is it's very difficult for a single small farmer to have all of the capabilities to cover what he needs to do or she needs to do on the supply side and the demand side. So as an example, farmers typically, especially small farmers, want to farm. They want to plant, they want to harvest. They don't necessarily have the skills to be the best marketers on the planet. So what we propose is what we call the big small farm. So how can we organize small farmers in such a way that they are able to operate at the kind of scale of a commercial farmer? And if they're able to do that successfully, they're able to then access supply, so fertilizer, an example, at a much lower cost. They're then able to access bigger markets. Now, the trick is not just to take 10 farmers growing maize on, let's say, 10 or 20 hectares, or 100 of these maize farmers, and pulling them together. The question is not just bringing these small farmers together, but also partnering them with the larger farmer, but to do it in a way that both the small farmer and the larger farmer benefits. And this is really what we mean by the big small farm. So it's taking 100 small farmers and getting them to work together. By doing that, they then create larger economies of scale. Because of their larger scale, they're able to pay lower prices for their inputs. Because of the larger scale, they can then access support such as, and include elements such as precision farming. So Jacques will talk about precision farming when he talks about the experience of GWK with the Emerging Farmer programs. This, for example, is where you do scientific analysis on soil at your farm before you actually decide what crops you're going to plant in your next cycle, and therefore decide the crop that's going to give you the best yield. So what we're proposing in the big small farm concept is we get a lot of farmers planting a similar crop to band together. They then increase the amount of inputs they need. They're able to do that with at a lower cost. They're also able to access, bigger markets. And if they're able to do that, for them to be able to do that, what we really need them to do is partner with the larger commercial enterprise. And we have some examples of that people like Jacques and Michael will talk about later. And by partnering with the bigger farmer, what they are then able to do is access the farmer's supply chain. The bigger farmer is able to assist in areas like training. Now, I know this all sounds very simple, and whenever I hear something that sounds like a silver bullet, I generally go running in the other direction, as we all should. So it sounds simple, but to implement it isn't. And that's where BeyondCOVID comes in. So our role really here is to bring all the parties together. We need the bigger farmers to partner with the smaller farmers. Obviously, the community is a very important aspect. How do we access grant funding? The positive experiences of the Jobs Fund and the World Bank in the space say that these models do work, but you need a lot of stakeholders to come together. You need a significant amount of grant funding. But once you get this model right, the big benefit is that smaller farmers grow, emerging farmers grow into SMME farmers, and then they eventually become corporate farmers. The large farmers also benefit. They're able to access land that they might not have access to. They're able to access labor and scale that they don't have access to. So this is really, truly the model we need to be aiming for. And as BeyondCOVID, we're happy to supply the parts. So bring all the parties together. If we find that there's, let's say, hail netting that is not available, we work with, as an example, the IDC to promote that sector so it's accessible to the big, small farms we want to help create. So see us as the people that provide not just the spare parts to bring all of this together, but also as the mechanic, will help put the parts together, and when something breaks, to roll up the sleeves and get involved. I understand that Etienne's lab was crashed, so I'm going to kindly, if you move on to the next. Etienne, are you back online?
I am indeed.
Excellent.
Okay. If we look at the de-risking of the farmers. I think links have, elaborated, extensively about the benefits that the farmers get to, the larger markets, to less expensive supply chains, as well as finance, by virtue of partnering or collaborating with a larger corporate partner. It's also important to understand the benefits that the corporates, in particular the financiers and even the markets, as well as the suppliers, get by this collectivization of large and small farmers. Having spent 20-odd years in the boiler room of various financial institutions, I'm well aware of the costs of originating and servicing debt, and the massive kinds of infrastructure that you need to have in place, particularly when you are dealing with smaller, higher risk accounts. The value proposition for the commercial financiers, as well as the sponsors of corporate social responsibility grants and other in-kind donations, is that they can bypass the administrative overhead of having to deal with dozens, if not hundreds, of different, sometimes hard to reach individual entities, and then they have the opportunity to engage with a single sophisticated operation that runs in a corporate fashion that brings the transaction costs for all involved down, above and beyond the risk benefits that we also know. So in a way, there is a lot said about access to markets, access to suppliers, and access to funding from a risk perspective. But what's sometimes neglected is just the raw administrative effort of dealing with diverse, sometimes remote groups of people. And BeyondCOVID will then also simplify that for the corporate world to engage with dozens and hundreds, hopefully, of emerging farmers. If we then move to our last slide, if we now talk about how do we actually do this, the first thing to realize here is that we are looking at 6, potentially 7 distinct group of stakeholders that need to sometimes have a culture and a history of speaking and engaging with each other, but often do not. We as BeyondCOVID, having been in this space for a long time, having built the relationships with players that have experience to do this, we will bring templates to the party and very skilled individuals and networks of professionals so that we can take these parties quickly through a process whereby they can reach a sufficient level of formalism that they can actually crowd in the donor funds and the commercial credit. So in terms of what we do beyond this point, when there's interest, when the funding, is the right structures, we can bring these parties together, take them through a process, make sure they've got the right corporate structure, that they've got a workable and sustainable constitution, and that they've got a minimum set of operating policies that commercial lenders can comfortably engage with them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Etienne and Links. That was, it's interesting, and I think the concept of the big, small farm certainly is something that that I believe has traction. I think if you what for me is always difficult is for a new farmer, a new entrant, to compete against somebody that has got capital, that's got a long history of successful farming, and all of a sudden we expect new entrants to be able to compete against these established businesses. Simply put, we need to find a better, smarter way to do that. And my view is that the big, small farm is certainly one of those ideas that should have legs. Now we're going to look at lessons learned from emerging farmer programs. And I'm happy to start with Nazim Hendricks. Now, Nazim is part of the senior leadership team at the Jobs Fund within National Treasury. He worked closely on Jobs Fund sponsored projects, including several emerging farmer development programs. So Nazim, over to you. I look forward to your session.
Good morning, everybody. So yeah, the Jobs Fund was established in 2011 And I think the context in which that was done is important. The context where we had persistent high levels of unemployment, government was particularly unsuccessful in developing the necessary strategy to overcome challenges that they had, particularly with regard to innovation, flexible instruments to leverage the private sector and thereby maximize any intervention within the market. We were capitalized at 9 billion with a headline target of creating 150,000 jobs. We were capitalized as a challenge fund, and many people ask us why a challenge fund. The answer to that is really that, firstly, the public purse has been constrained for some time. A challenge fund promotes innovation. It promotes risk sharing, as only the most innovative or competitive proposals will eventually receive funding from the Jobs Fund as a challenge fund. It enables the crowding in of further funding from the private sector in particular, and thereby maximizing impact of any particular intervention that one is likely to undertake. It also, very importantly, based on coupled to what Ling said earlier, it promotes collaboration amongst various players within the market, and also is the most transparent process that one could undertake, and that's particularly crucial within a South African context. Now, the Jobs Fund, next slide please. The Jobs Fund supports funding via 4 windows. We have the support for work seekers, enterprise development window, institutional capacity building. I'd like to stop there. I think is very important, because while there is a significant amount of money floating around for support of particularly smallholder farmers, very often we have found that the capacity within the market to actually get that money to the people who need it in the best way possible doesn't necessarily exist. So very important that one creates and develops, nurtures that institutional capacity at the level of the farming beneficiary. We also have an infrastructure investment window. One has to say that that's not necessarily large-scale infrastructure, because at a 9 billion budget, I think you'd appreciate that we couldn't really play in that space. It's really about enabling infrastructure around our approved beneficiaries. We've been able to play a part across the economic spectrum. There is a list there on that slide of the various type of models that we've implemented across that spectrum. Now, within the context of this presentation, of course, agriculture is key. And it's really been at the core of what the Jobs Fund has done. 45 of 146 projects that has been approved and is being implemented is within the agriculture space. That is about 31% of our total portfolio. Next slide, please. So what have we done? As I've said, we've contracted 146 projects. 5.6 billion has been disbursed to these projects thus far. That's till the end of March of this year. Very importantly, we've been able to leverage about 11.2 billion from the market, in funding from the market. That is for every rand of Jobs Fund or public funds that has been invested in the market, we've been able to leverage 2 rand from the market. And I think that's a very important number. In terms of job achievements, our headline indicators, we've achieved just over 280,000 jobs or facilitated 280,000 jobs and internships. We've enabled just over 266,000 individuals to access focused training interventions. The demographics, of course, is still very important to us. 57% of our beneficiaries has been women, and 64% thereof has been within the youth space. Of course, we'd like to think, and we have evidence, that our impact goes way beyond simply the creation of those jobs, as important as those jobs are, of course. And within the context of this presentation, I'd like to focus on the SMME support sector, support that we've had, the impact that we've had, the holistic structured support that we've provided both to the informal and formal sectors. And how have we done this? We've looked at the value chain, right? We've facilitated the development of new value chains. We've enabled previously disadvantaged or farmers to enter established value chain in a sustainable way. And I think that is very important. Sustainability is key. If you're doing a once-off intervention where you simply get somebody into a value chain for a short period of time, you're not really helping them. It's got to be a long-term sustainable thing. We've done particularly well on the technical skills development, and here those skills development has got to be structured. It's got to be focused on the individual. And we've had a history in the past of simply training for the sake of training, as opposed to training, focusing that training to the specific needs of the value chain of the individual that we're dealing with. We've been pretty successful in implementing models where we minimize or mitigate the risks faced by or represented by smallholder or emerging farmers. We've done so via capital guarantee schemes. Blended finance products have been very successful in lowering the risk perception of those farmers, and thereby including them in being able to access funding, reasonable funding. And I would like to stress that we've seen many funding packages that is totally inappropriate for the fund, for the needs of that particular beneficiary. Throwing money at a problem doesn't necessarily solve your problem. It's got to be structured in a way that's consistent with the value chain and actually ultimately helps that beneficiary. We've also piloted a social impact one. I have to say, I think it was the first one in South Africa we've done. And I think very importantly also other pay for performance platforms has been tested successfully within the Jobs Fund. Now, I think very proudly we will say that we've achieved that elusive balance, right, of achieving our numbers. We've done 280,000 jobs internships versus a target of 150. We've done so at a cost that I think is lower than most of other players in the market. We've done so cost effectively. Our cost is about 10% of our total budget. Similar challenge funds tends to plug in within a range of about 15 to 33%. And I think we've been successful in improving ourselves as a trusted development partner. Next slide, please. Now, within an agri context, I think we've spoken about the challenges, reducing the barriers within the agriculture space for emerging farmers. Two things that I think Ling's touched on. Sustainability is very important. Very often we see initiatives that is simply a once-off, doesn't necessarily benefit the farming community or the emerging farmers. Key learnings that we've had, most important one is collaboration. We cannot have small farmers operating in silos on their own. They don't have the scale to do that, which is the be and end all, because there's no ways for them to be competitive next to a commercial farmer. We at the Jobs Fund firmly believe, and we've tested this and have enough evidence to prove that support has to be comprehensive. It's got to be as comprehensive support. Throwing money at a problem is not sufficient. We've got to provide long-term sustainable support to those emerging farmers. Programs must be tailored to a particular value chain, long-term horticulture, very different value chain to, let's say, a sugar outgrow value chain. So it's got to be tailored. Blended finance, as I've said, we've shown that it can successfully mitigate risk inherent in emerging farmers, and we've had quite a few models. Of course, that is linked to various moratoria within the structuring of those. Farm selection is critical. And here I want to stress the interest, the alignment of interest between the various parties within that value chain. Sustainability measure must be clear and monitored, and focused training support, technical training support cannot be a generalized. We don't really help the farmers doing that. Thank you, Jake.
Thank you very much, Nazim. That was enlightening, and I want to, from my point of view, congratulate you. I think the Jobs Fund is one of the more successful challenges that we have in South Africa, and that was successful. So from my point of view, congratulations. I think these numbers speak for themselves, and I think you provide a valuable contribution. From Beyond COVID, obviously the opportunity is to what extent Beyond COVID and the initiative can assist you and perhaps be a partner for you going forward in terms of not only scaling up the benefits, but also assisting in the long-term challenge that all of us want to see working, and that is establishing successful new farmers that can be an asset to the community they operate in. So from my point of view, Nazim, thank you very much for your time, and I think it was a informative presentation, and congratulations. Well done, guys.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate it.
Our next speaker is from GWK. It's Jacques Higo. Now, Jacques is a member of the senior leadership team at GWK. He's a founding member of Agriqua, a GWK subsidiary focusing on its emerging farmer development programs. He has played a pivotal role in the establishment of innovative structures to allow emerging farmers in the Taung area access to resources that enable commercial level yields and crop grades. Jacques, I look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much. All right, we're going to start with a short video on GWK. Thanks, Jeff. Jeff, there's no sound.
Cows with a moo moo here and a moo moo. Old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I. And on his farm, he had some cows with a moo moo here and a moo moo there. Chicks chirped, ducks quacked, pigs oink oinked, and sheep bah bah. Vines shot up and fruit trees grew. Old MacDonald had a farm, and he farmed the way that farmers did, with a horse and a plow that he kept in a shed. But the world grew bigger, and there were more mouths to feed. He knew he had to meet the need. So old MacDonald technologized. He learned new ways to farm the land and found out what the factories planned. And now he wakes up every day to feed you and you and you, because old MacDonald has a farm, and that's just what farmers do. GWK, feeding the people who feed the people.
Right, thanks, Jeff. Go to the first slide. Alrighty, so welcome to GWK. The company is about innovation of agricultural. We consist out of 4,000 shareholders, which are all farmers. Our turnover is around about 6.6 billion. Our asset base is 3.5 billion, and we employ around about 1,700 permanent people in our organization. We've got 4 divisions, namely in front of you, GWK Agricultural, Farm Foods, Trading, and Support Services. And these guys are really there to support the farmer with tools and technology to do what they do best, and that is farming. So from that perspective, within the organization, we've got a vehicle called Agriqua Holdings, and that vehicle was designed to deliver transformation within GWK and also to create future clients for GWK through our emerging farmer projects. So in a nutshell, GWK is the backbone for our emerging farmer projects. Without GWK, the projects will not deliver what they deliver, and they will basically close. Next slide, Jeff. All right, so our project currently is in Taung, and why Taung? Taung is quite a complex area, and I think in context, huge opportunity. Unemployment rate is 49.8%, youth unemployment is 61.7%, and what we're trying to do through Agriqua Holdings is to make farming sexy for the youngsters. So we use a lot of precision farming with technology, tablets and tools, and so to pull them into agricultural. So for us, it's a huge opportunity to make a difference in the community through our projects. Taung itself, in terms of opportunities, I mean, Taung at this point in time has got infrastructure in place. There's a huge opportunity, 3,756 hectares that's currently under center pivots, which we only support 710 hectares currently because of the access of funding. So we are really capped in terms of what we can do. However, with more funding, we can create more farmers in our project. So it's a huge opportunity. The infrastructure is available. Everything is there. The potential for growth is huge, and the community really needs it. Next slide, Jeff. Alrighty, so in terms of challenges, I think every project in terms of emerging farmers have a lot of challenges. I'm going to focus on the few ones that really makes or breaks the project. So in terms of funding, without funding, the project will not survive. We cannot help or support those farmers. Currently, we do 2 crop cycles per annum, a winter and a summer crop cycle. We need about 20 million per cycle. That's 40 million per annum. Our farmers are not bankable, so GWK supports those farmers from an input cost fund point of view. We do get some funding from the Jobs Fund and some other funders that we've applied for. However, if GWK pulls out tomorrow, we can close this project. So funding is critical for the survival and the growth of this project. The other area that I've highlighted there that's critical, we currently have 40 hectare pivots with 4 farmers on a pivot, 10 hectares each. 10 hectares is not commercial viable. So what we've done is we've pulled the farmers into a co-op. And so now we've got a project with 700 hectares, which is commercial viable. In terms of a project, we do still have challenges. There's some farmers that does not want to form part of the project. So you might have 2 or 3 farmers on a pivot planting a crop and another farmer planting a different crop. So in terms of economical scales, cost and all those things, it just drives the cost up in terms of the project. Poor pivot conditions and poor soil conditions. I mean, the pivots have never been maintained in the last 10 years. They're about 20 years old. And when we bring these farmers on board, it's quite challenging to get the pivots up and running. It's costly, and if you don't have funding for that, it really stops you from creating or growing the project. Soil conditions, the soil has been depleted for the last 20 years, very little fertilizer been put in. So in terms of soil correction to get to commercial yields, it's quite costly. So this project in the beginning when it started, it's very, very costly compared to your commercial farmers. But if you don't do it, you will never get to commercial yields. So you will never have a bankable project. There are many more challenges, but those are the ones that really is key. If we can't sort out the infrastructure and we can't sort out the funding, we don't have a project. Next slide, please. So I know this is a busy slide. However, this is what we've done so far in terms of our project. We started in 2019, that's our first project, was cotton. We had 21 farmers, and that project was a huge lesson learned. And in terms of the fact that the farmers were individually, some farmers made profit, some farmers made loss. We paid out 2.2 million for 60% of farmers, and we wrote off 1.8 million for the 40% of farmers that didn't make money. So we created the co-op for the next project, which was wheat. We had 30 farmers in those projects. And the co-op principles is straightforward. The costs are offset against the income, and the profits are paid out to the farmers in relation to their yields. I'm just going to focus on the high-end yields from that's column 10. I think it's important that we have farmers that actually do deliver commercial yields. The brackets there that you see is commercial farmers in that area. And so we have farmers that delivers commercial yields in terms of the project. So the farmers can deliver commercial yields, and I think that's our drive in terms of the project, is to have commercial yields through precision farming, to have sustainable projects going forward. If it's not a sustainable project, we can't support the project. In terms of job creation, we've created 76, that's our farmers in the project, 10 permanent jobs, that's contractors, and 243 seasonal jobs. So far, none of the projects has made a loss. That's column column 6. That's the profits that we've paid out to the farmers in relation to the project. There's just some photographs of the farmers in the Tamu area. And at this point in time, we've got 26% of our farmers are women, and we are now putting in youth into the project as well. So all in all, a good project. We've done very, very well with what we've got, and there's huge opportunity to grow Taung if funding is available. Support we've got, the structure we've got, the backbone we've got, funding is crucial for us to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jacques. Certainly a good story, a positive story, and thank you very much. I think we should not underestimate the opportunity that lies in this yield gap. And it seems that you guys are getting it right to close the yield gap, and that although there's challenges in it, that provides immediate upliftment and immediate increase in the success of the project. So Jacques, thank you very much. Well done.
Thank you.
Now, our next speaker is Dr. Michael Magondu. He is from, this is a very interesting name. He is a co-founder of Wouldn't It Be Cool? That's WIBC, Wouldn't It Be Cool? An open innovation idea and business incubator. He is one of the initiators of the Urban Agriculture Initiative, a project that has been developed by the Joburg Inner City Partnership with support from the City of Johannesburg, the Department of Small Business Development, the Small Enterprise Development Agency, and SAB's Kickstart, with the aim to create, and this is the important one, with the aim of creating a vibrant urban agriculture ecosystem by innovatively repurposing disused rooftops and making use of hydroponics and aquaponics to produce agriculture produce for Johannesburg inner city communities. I hand over to you, Dr. Michael Magondu.
Thank you very much, Theo. So I think good morning to everyone. I'm not going to go through, I think Theo has introduced us well enough. The important thing here is that we've been doing this since 2017. And where we are now is we've seen a continuation and expansion of this initiative through multiple projects coming in to support it, one of which is the new project that we kicked off with Jobs Fund in 2019, or at the end of 2019, and has continued the same model, but continued to create impact for communities in Gauteng. Next slide, please, Jeff. If we can play the video, here's a little introductory video. So,
South Africa's urban areas is threatening food security in cities. Gauteng has a population of over 14 million, followed by KwaZulu-Natal. Now, what kind of contribution can urban farming make to the agricultural industry, and what are the benefits? I'm joined by Dr. Michael Magondo from it's an urban agriculture initiative, and it's called Wouldn't It Be Cool? I love that title. Explain to us, what is urban farming? So urban farming, urban agriculture, it's agriculture, but within an urban environment. So you can imagine the biggest constraint that's there is you don't have the typical key resource that most farming or agricultural environments have, which is vast spaces of land. Yeah. We've got to try and do this in very small areas within urban spaces. And I think we've cottoned on to the term urban agriculture, but there's always been agriculture happening around the urban spaces. What has started to change is the amount of technology being applied to it, and that's improving the efficiency and the productive output of many of these operations. One of the projects that we currently have is an inner city incubator that runs within the inner city of Johannesburg. In that space, the initiative that we've run over the last year is to help young entrepreneurs come onto rooftop farms where they get a 200 square meter operation. And from that, you would be surprised at what kind of output each farm, a 200 square meter farming operation, can produce anything from 300 to 500. And with the new technologies now, we see 900 kgs a month of produce coming out of such an operation. It's about the ability to increase the number of plants that you can grow within a very small space, but also reduce the dependency on other critical resources. We consume 95–98% less water than open field farming.
95–98% less water.
Absolutely.
Okay, next slide, please, Jeff. So I think we've been hearing a lot about some of the generic challenges that are facing emerging farmers or smallholder farmers. I'm not going to repeat some of those, and I think Links did a good job in terms of unpacking what some of those realities are for a small farmer. But I just want to touch on some very unique challenges that farmers sitting within an urban context, and these are the guys that we're trying to help, have to try and overcome. So one of the biggest issues that, Jacques spoke about, small farming not being sustainable at 10 hectares. And that's true for row crop and the spaces they are. We have to try and do it on hundreds of square meters. So it's really much smaller levels of operations. And so volumes and scale are a big challenge within this space. Second to that is there's a lot of intermediaries and there's very little equity that comes back to the primary producers. There's horror stories of farmers supplying produce into Joburg Fresh Produce, especially very small quantities, and never seeing enough return to even pay for the transportation costs to move produce from Soweto to City Deep. And then the other challenge that's there is when we start looking at, well, there's a lot of structures to support farmers, smallholder farmers, and which they are. But many urban dwellers lack sometimes the track record in commercial agriculture to be able to access these sort of facilities. And also the complement of skills. It's one thing to provide an individual with skills to grow crops. It's another thing to have the skills to actually develop and run a commercial enterprise. And what we found is there's an over-focus on just the growing of crops and not the commercial activity, the business itself. And then the last thing is obviously competition, whether it's local or international competition, dumping of products, and it's made it very difficult, especially in sectors like the poultry sector, for local farmers to compete, especially small. Next slide, please. So what have we tried to do? And I think this is important because since 2017, when we started this initiative, we continuously learn through the experiences that we have, through the experiences of our beneficiaries, but also through the inputs brought through by partners. Access to markets is a critical area that we've tried to answer. And to do this, we've looked at aggregation. So across multiple farmers being able to bring markets together, bring produce together and supply into some of our key market partners. So we have market partnerships with the like of Food Lovers and Checkers, and we continue to secure more innovative channels. We also have developed a direct-to-consumer model, which is also helping address some of the pricing challenges that many smallholder farmers need to undertake. Also, equipping our beneficiaries with the skills to develop very niche markets. So if you saw the slide up at the top, one of those entrepreneurs was actually looking at a successful hop farm where he is growing hops and supplying that into a very niche craft brewing market. And these are the efforts that we undertake to try and address access to market. Then the risk models. You know, one of the biggest challenges is any funder tries to address risk by looking at the entrepreneur, the business owner, and looking at models to assess risk. What we've had to do is build in opportunities for beneficiaries to meet what these risk models are trying to look at. So we've developed an internal revolving fund that allows us to work with our beneficiaries for them to build a credit record on these small initial operations, which then makes them more suitable candidates for larger, lower risk funders who are within the marketplace. We've had to develop alternative risk assessment methods, and those start from the time a beneficiary puts in an application with us all the way through to when we sit and do an NCR approved credit assessment before the funding is provided to the beneficiary. We've also looked at how do we make these smaller operations more competitive, and the use of, for instance, shared certified facilities. So pack houses, we have a certified pack house facility that's available. We've partnered with other organizations, for instance, with Munching Mongoose out in Joburg North. We've then been able to put together a partnership that allows some of our beneficiaries to work out of their Global Gap certified facility where they're supplying produce into the international markets. A critical thing there as well is we've been able to make use of ecosystems. So bringing our beneficiaries closer together where they have related products. We have a poultry ecosystem that we've developed out in the north of Johannesburg that starts all the way from the laying of fertilized eggs all the way through to the sale of live chickens into smaller communities, informal settlements, where the competition from dumped international products is not as, has not severely affected it. And this results in a much more competitive value chain that is able to stand to the needs. So what do we need? I think for us, there's a couple of critical asks that we have to any parties that we speak to. The one is access to markets. Through our Miller Fresh model, we're providing a direct-to-consumer model, but we're always looking for more sites, be it corporate or residential buildings, that we continue to roll out within Gauteng. This gives our farmers access to higher value markets, and working with Gauteng Agriculture, we're extending this to other smallholder farmers beyond just our farmers. Investment is always important. So whether it's ESD or ED funding, to continue to capacitate our revolving fund. I think the most disheartening thing, you know, when we rolled out our Jobs Fund project in 2019, we obviously had the onset of COVID. And during lockdown, we started our first intake. And for every seat we had on the program, we had about 50 participants respond wanting to take up that seat. Now, we've had to turn away beneficiaries, sometimes because of the limitation of the funding resources available, and investment would help us. And then finally, collaboration with technical partners. So there are multiple avenues that we can look at. And with that, I know I'm out of time, Theo. I hand back to you.
Thank you very much, Michael. That's certainly informative. It's interesting, and I hope you all the best. I think wouldn't it be cool to farm in an urban area? I think that is a wonderful way of looking at it. I think that is technology can play a big role, and I do think that this is a major contributor to assisting not only with food security, but bringing more people within the bigger food value chain. Michael, thank you very much, and I wish you all the best. Our next speaker is David Thompson. Dave is the Group Economic Development Executive at RCL Foods. Dave is an agriculture economist with over 25 years of practical and commercial experience working widely in the South African sugar and food manufacturing industry. He has specialist knowledge of stimulating agriculture production in the rural areas by promoting a rental market for land, irrigated sugarcane agriculture, land reform, and general tenure issues that added value to the numerous community development projects he has been involved in. Dave, thank you very much for making the time, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thanks, Theo. Morning, everyone. If you can just move on to the next slide. Thanks. I am working for a small banking organization called Akwanzi. We're based in Nkomazi district in Mpumalanga, and we operate within the sugar industry. It was just interesting to note when Faye made her introduction about the loss of operational capability during COVID and the challenges experienced by small or emerging farmers. And just to say, within the industry, we're lucky that the industry value chain has managed to continue throughout COVID and the challenges experienced in the various lockdowns. And it's had a minimal impact on our farmers, which has really been a great thing. Just in terms of Akwanzi, a little bit of background. It's a DFI that was established in 2006 to meet the needs of small-scale growers that operates on communal land. It's truly a shared value model. It's a partnership between the small-scale farmers through a cooperative called Liguguletu, and then through the sugar milling company, RCL Foods. And both parties invested equity. The farmers raised their own equity and invested into the company. And since then, by approaching wholesale funders, the company's been able to leverage about 610 million now under management. And we make a small margin on all of that, and hence we're able to pay back dividends to both the shareholders. The main purpose of Akwanzi is to ensure that there's adequate and affordable credit to our farmers. I think all farmers can't operate without credit. We've got to make sure that we're cost effective and that we then create a sustainable value chain. The sugar industry is driven off a large value chain, and cane supply is critical throughout that value chain. And so we've got to make our contribution to that sustainability. And we're fortunate that we're able to ride off the institutional structure of a corporate to set up our systems and our processes. We've injected about 2.5 billion so far into the small-scale grower sector in Mpumalanga, and our non-performing loans are really small. They're about 0.7%, so less than 1% of withdrawn loans. So we really have a very high success rate. Next slide, please. And this is largely due to the model and the nature of the model. And also, I'll just work through some key success factors. We're an off-balance sheet lender, so we do not take any security from any of our clients. They operate on communal land, so the traditional security that's needed to run agricultural operations is not available. They generally do have poor economies of scale. I know it's a bit of a focus of the session is how do we get increased scale economies? Many of our clients are sitting with average field sizes around about 8 hectares. And from about 1,000 registered growers, they produce about 625,000 tons of cane. We're able to offer these guys really competitive rates from as low as prime -1 through to prime +4. And the crop is what provides security in this value chain. I think you can see on the right-hand side, I'm not sure if the graphic is there, but our oldest client is 100 years old. And I'm not sure there's many people out there that would be willing to lend money to a 100-year-old farmer with no security. And the secret is we have this closed loop value chain. You can only deliver your cane to a sugar mill. You can't, there's no alternate markets for sugar cane. We have visibility throughout the value chain. We're able to monitor deliveries to the mill. That's where we secure our payments from. And we're able to have a look at and have a good estimate of what's going on with farmers' yields. We take a session on proceeds to secure our payment. So the security is the crop out there. We have good and lots of eyes on the crop, and it lowers the risk. And therefore, we can offer very competitive rates, I believe, in the emerging grower sector. It's been covered by previous speakers. Technical support is critical in all of this. We have a sister organization called TS Grow, and they provide extension support out there to the farmers. We know our clients. We have a team of 10 people that have eyes on the clients all the time. We are monitoring yields, the agricultural performance, which allows us to then start monitoring and managing our risks. We have all our farmers' fields out there are mapped. They're GPS mapped, and this avoids what's known as ghost cane within the industry, where a farmer might try and deliver on another farmer's grower number and avoid making any payments to us. So we really largely manage our risk via that. I think my final slide, we're just focusing on some of our lessons learned. And in prep for this session, when I was having a chat to Etienne, you know, there's this big drive to improve scale and drive consolidation of farming entities. And all our farmers in Nkomazi are based on irrigation schemes. They have to operate as group entities. So the map on the slide is a typical irrigation scheme where we have every single farmer's field mapped out. They share communal irrigation infrastructure, and they have to behave like a co-op. In some cases, some of these projects have actually consolidated into cooperatives, and they're running farms of 200 to 300 hectares in extent. So they've gone and achieved the scale economies. But that comes with a number of challenges, and I'll cover that soon. I think when it comes to lending into the emerging farmer space, National Credit Act compliance is absolutely key. It is a rigorous act. Reckless lending is a big part of that act, and it is critical then to know your client to ensure that you're not going to fall foul of reckless lending. If you are consolidating and you do form a co-op and a legal entity, the reckless lending condition does fall away, but you still need to really get on top of your credit checks and gather in all the supporting documentation that's required to meet this act, just to ensure that you are lending good credit. I'm not going to go through support services. We know how important that is. The other thing that we've learned is that you need to have a diversified team. The previous speaker spoke about there's always this focus on production and very little focus on commercial experience. And the same thing with this is often there's this big focus on just driving production. But the moment you have a group that comes together, you have significant social challenges that emerge within that group. And that can impact on a lot of your production and your risk in a project. So what we've learned is that we've actually employed social specialists within our organization to try and address social dynamics that do emerge. And often we find that you need to resolve social issues prior to finding the technical and the production solutions. Another big factor that's often ignored is a gentleman by the name of Mr. Kiswetter. And when he wants his money, he takes preference over everybody else. And what we find is as we're getting growers that consolidate into bigger entities, whether it's at a personal level or at a group level, they often cross the VAT threshold of R1 million and then fall into arrears with SARS. And the moment you fall into arrears with SARS, it does put a lot of your lending and your recoverability of loans at risk. And as a microfinance institution like we are, personal tax and trying to get farmers to get their tax in order to minimize our risk becomes quite challenging at times and impacts on our ability to on-lend to people. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Dave. Certainly, I share what you've said, but I think the key is congratulations, well done. If I look at the amount of non-performing loans, certainly you are doing something right. So all the best, and I think this is the kind of contributions that will assist us going forward, and that we will all have to look at and take some lessons from. Our next speaker is from the SMME Group. It is Pietro Nudia. Pietro is a project manager at the SMME Group with more than 10 years experience in project management and administration. For the past 4 years, she's been project managing SARNIC's Emerging Farmers program. Since the program initiated, SARNIC, in partnership with the Jobs Fund, have been able to offer CETA accredited training to emerging farmers in various aspects of cattle breeding, establishing a successful cooperative with emerging farmers, and created the opportunity for emerging farmers to become profitable commercial farmers who are able to look after their families and employ others in their community. And that was what I was referring to earlier. A successful farmer or a successful food producer, if you are successful, you are an asset not only to your families, but to the community. Pietro, I look forward to your participation.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. As you said, we have been working on this program for the last 3.5 years. We worked with more than 660 cattle farmers in Central South Africa. Our farmers went through a stepped approach where they were recruited into a tier 1 or a tier 2, and they could graduate further to tier 4 as they progressed. As they went up, they received more incentives. So out of these many farmers, 300 farmers have formal land tenure of at least 5 years or more, and more than 25 productive cattle. Out of the 300, we then have 56 farmers that have reached commercial stage and are able to farm with more than 100 productive cattle. We are also making the best of our farmers tier 4 farmers, which means that they become shareholders in our abattoir. The program has 2 distinct components, a farmer's development component and a value chain component, and the 2 should work together for success. The farmers in the development program forms a closed ecosystem in which SARNIC knows everything about the farmer. Our value proposition is that we provide accredited training, we provide mentorship and monitors progress through regular farm visits. This then leads to sustainable farming techniques and improved wealth creation for each of the successful farmers. All the farm reports are contained in a database for reference, such as if we were to lend to farmers. The Farmers Development Program needs at least 20 to 30% grant funding to ensure the enabling environment for the program. Grant funding is money that does not need to be paid back and is required to cover costs such as the mentors, infrastructure, training, and project management. The costs that do not generate returns directly. Please note that in this program, no cash was provided to the beneficiary, other than the salary for 12 months. The bulk of the cash is used to purchase infrastructure, herds for the farmers, custom feeding in the feedlot, where the beneficiaries participate in the profits. We paid this profits out via salary for 12 months. The second component of this project is the value chain. SARNIC has the following value chain entities: stud farm and commercial cattle, phase C testing station, a feed factory, feedlot of 12,500 cattle, country meat, abattoir, Kroonstad, wholesaling and retailing entities, as well as a brand. The program being managed within the value chain allowed us to generate additional funding to the loan funding. You can see the statistics at the bottom. We used the profits from the custom feeding as well as the commercial cattle to create additional funding. Without this value chain, it would have been very difficult to create additional funding. COVID also made it worse because there were months that we could not supply our meat to hotels and restaurants, you remember, or we also the market to the farmers. Also, we had to read the market on when to do custom feeding or not. Managing a feedlot is not always profitable, and it depends very much on the feed price and the price of the weaners and your management skills. If one is not in the red meat value chain, it's difficult to negotiate these pitfalls. Nevertheless, the program has paid the loan funding back in time and with the required interest. Next slide. Just to summarize then, we have received 165 million from the Jobs Fund plus additional COVID funding, which helped the beneficiaries to recover from the hard lockdown. SADC provided a total of 337 million in cash, loans and infrastructure, and additional funding was generated through custom feeding, and that was 750 million. Next slide, please. So we started in 2018. You've already heard the statistics, 660 farmers, 300 in tier 2, then 56 graduated to tier 3, and these tier 3s are now able to produce or work with 100 productive cattle. In the training field, all the accredited training, we did 300 people with a year-long NQF course, which was either NQF 2 or 3 or 4. If it was not the farmer, it was his successor. We also had to provide food, accommodation. The grant is important to cover amongst these aspects of the project. We also monitored and mentored and measured program on each farm. And the results are available on an integrated database. So there's a report of each visit. For the 56 farmers in tier 3, we provided each a rental herd of 35 pregnant cows and a bull, and up to 300,000 in infrastructure and the ability to access a closed financial loan. Also remember that we are a financial service provider. That totals more than 2,000 good genetic cattle and 15,000 rand worth of infrastructure. The rental herd is an innovative solution whereby the beneficiary must pay back 40% of the progeny every year to the project. Also, in terms of salaries, you must remember we used the profit from the custom feeding to pay 656 people a year's salary at more than the minimum wage for the agriculture sector. They had to also pay UIF and tax. The tier 3 farmers had received a salary of 7,000 rand a month, tier 2 farmers 4,000 rand a month, and so on. We've also created 1,200 permanent jobs. The growth was measured on each of these 300 farmers. 48% of our sales, annual sales, goes to black farmers because they are very serious about improving the genetics of their farming methods and their cattle. I can also then say that the best of the best farmers in tier 3 were selected to become beneficiaries. And it's important to know that we must give equal attention not only to the farmers' skills in terms of marketing and business, but to their herds as well as their farm and their pastures and their infrastructure. Okay, the next slide. The program forms a closed ecosystem. That means, okay, there's no next slide. The program forms a closed ecosystem. That means that there's only approved beneficiaries within a specific system. They all comply the same criteria. They have the same criteria. This gives confidence to the investors that the risk of any loan funding can be repaid and that the grant is spent appropriately. Everything is captured on a database. There's clear yardsticks against which farmers are measured in terms of assessing their process, making the system fair and just to all who participate. We have to create an enabling environment, and that is where we use grant funding. Grant funding is not always easy to get, but we did get that from the Jobs Fund. You must remember we need the grant funding to maintain the project management, the visiting to the farmers. You know, we've had 7 vehicles traveling an average of 5,000 kilometers a month in order to do the farm visits. Financial and outcome audits are undertaken by international and externally, both internally and externally, and social facilitation supports the outcome. 3 monthly reports are provided as well as the initial baseline. You must remember that the Jobs Fund provides their grant quarterly and will not pay the drawdown if SARNIC did not perform on all the required outcomes. That shows if SARNIC did not perform and showed that it has paid its required match funding, the Jobs Fund will not pay out. So all the remaining funding will go back into a rental herd, which is to maintain the tier 3s on a long-term basis. In summary, then, I'm going to conclude the strength of the program is that it's able to assist beneficiaries in the long term and, sorry, things are going wrong here. Okay. It's able to generate additional funding from loan funding because of the associated value chain. The existing value chain is the essential part to make the program successful. Investors can be assured that the program is able to pay back the debt finance as well as to leave funds behind for the maintenance of the tier 3s in the program. This program has had a large impact not only on farmers, their families, and downstream activities, but on the communities as well. Nick Sarfontein, the chairman of SARNIC, captures it all when he regularly quotes Nelson Henderson, who said, "The true meaning of life is to plant trees under whose shade you do not expect to sit." I thank you.
Pietro, thank you very much. I must say I have visited the operation of SARNIC, and it is a great operation, and it's something to treasure if you see the joy of seeing a farmer taking part in the program, getting the necessary skills by going through the training course and becomes part of the bigger SARNIC value chain. So Pietro, thank you very much. I now have the pleasure, and this is exceptional pleasure, to award a 10,000 Rand grant by way of a lucky draw, and this is made possible by BeyondCOVID. But first of all, before I announce it, let me just emphasize that in the next session, so for all the participants that are smaller emerging farmers, SMME farmers, in the next session, 3 sessions, we will look at funding opportunities and various entities that can talk a bit more about funding. So I urge you, there will be value in that discussion. It is an important discussion. And then post that, we have the roundtable discussions on solving the bankability. That is a breakout with group representatives. So please stay with us. These sessions are important and there is value for you in there. So in terms of the 10,000 Rand grant by BeyondCOVID to an emerging farmer, it is my pleasure to announce the winner, and the winner of this is Brenda Tlabane. So Brenda, congratulations. I hope this 10,000 Rand makes a big difference to your operation, and we will be happy to follow the success. So thank you very much. The winner is Brenda Tlabane. Brenda, well done. Congratulations. You were lucky. But this could just be that bit of a difference that makes a whole lot of difference in your life. Now, our next session is funding SMME farmers. And our first participant from the IDC's Agri-Industrial Fund, the speaker is Gampi Papela. Gampi is the Business Development Manager for Agro Processing and Agriculture for the IDC. He played a significant role in the creation of the IDC's 1 billion rand agri-industrial fund. We look forward to your participation, Gampi.
Thanks very much, Theo, for the intro, and good morning to everyone. And thanks for allowing us to also come and participate. And having listened to the previous speakers, it looks like there is always a challenge, one of which is the balance sheet of the farmers. And that was also, that's how this agri-industrial fund started. It was a challenge for us as the IDC. We would like to fund the farmers, and we would like to fund all the farmers, those who are operating within the mandate of the IDC. But excuse me. Excuse me, sorry. Okay. So the challenge that we faced is where farmers come with good projects, but sometimes it's difficult to fund them because you can't always just put all the debt on the projects, drowning them in debt. And our funding model is not premised on security, it's more on the viability of the transaction. So because of that, we started negotiations with the department and said, various departments actually, we started, but eventually we had a breakthrough with the DALRAT, the Department of Agriculture, that if we were to partner and be able to have a form of grant funding that will help with the equity contribution for the farmers. It took us a while, but eventually we came to an agreement, and we're looking forward to this, and I think it will really go a long way. How the scheme works is that the grant goes up to a maximum of 40% of the project, or a maximum of 50 million rands per transaction. But obviously we don't fund everything. We have a mandate in which that guide us as the IDC. But for some areas, some of the areas that we're focusing on that we never used to focus to fund, it's poultry. In that we realized that there are quick wins. We were active participant in the poultry master plan. And what the approach that we did, we followed was to first ask the industry to say, okay, we're talking about emerging all the time, but for us, we wanted to really commercialize. And we said to them, what will it take, and what is the sort of minimum viable unit? What will you say in your view it's a commercial farmer in the space? And they gave us the numbers, they ran the models. For example, with broilers, they came to a number of 200,000 beds per cycle. Then we said, okay, right, if that's the case, that's what we want to fund. That's the minimum that we want to fund. Either a farmer is starting out or they expanding, but we sort of helping them to cross that line to be commercial. The same thing with the piggeries. We discussed with the industry. They came with what they believe it's a minimum viable unit, and that's how we ended up approaching the whole scheme. So there are sectors that we fund, even long-term crops, that's we're looking at that. But the grant funding, surely it comes in handy in that it helps to with the financial structure. It strengthens the balance sheet of the farmer, and we've been inundated with responses in the form of inquiries and actual application. We've launched this for less than 1.5 months ago. I can report that we've had already more than 30 applications that are qualifying, that we're busy processing, and we're looking forward to this sort of partnerships, not only with the Department of Agriculture, but hopefully with other potential funders who can also bring forth this sort of grant and other softer loans that can help us to extend and improve the participation of everyone in the sector. Yeah. Thanks, Theo. I think in summary, that's what it is. But I hope there will be a platform through which we can answer questions, if any. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kampi. That is, I certainly think, Kampi, that this is the kind of projects and the kind of analysis that we use. And what for me is very enlightening is the principle that you want to fund somebody with the ability to become a commercial farmer, which is important. And I do think that's one of the criteria that sometimes is missed, that there is certain key ingredients required from either from a volume or from a knowledge or from an infrastructure point of view. Otherwise, the challenge to climb the ladder to the next level is just so much more difficult. But thank you very much for your participation. And certainly, I believe in future that although we talk about the size of the fund now, I hope that in the next 5 or 10 years, it'll be factors bigger than it is now. So all the best, and I wish you success with the endeavor. Thank you very much for your participation. Our next speaker is Frans Roos. Now, I actually know Frans for a number of years, and I have a great respect for the business that they have built. Frans is the joint owner and financial director at Capital Harvest, a niche agriculture finance group established in 2006 and headquartered in Stellenbosch, which provide a wide spectrum of finance solutions to both commercial and developing farmers across South Africa. With funding under management in excess of 4 billion rand, the group has established itself as a leading agriculture financier in South Africa. Frans, welcome, and I look forward to your participation.
Thanks, Theo. Thank you very much for that introduction. Just by way of further introduction, I can maybe just add that Capital Harvest started in 2010, and right from the start, we were focused on finding solutions for emerging farmers. And we have a dedicated subsidiary called Capital Harvest Emerging Farmer Finance, which provides finance solely to emerging farmers, and which at the moment runs a book of just under 1 billion rand of finance to emerging farmer projects. And we were also successful in obtaining grants from the Jobs Fund in support of what we're doing. And my role here today is to shoot a bit straight and to tell you, in our experience, what worked and what didn't work. Makes my job easier because a lot of the previous speakers have covered the same issues that I'm going to raise, specifically Nazim and Michael actually touched on quite a couple of things. Excuse me. So I'm going to dive right in and just tell you where it all started. With the Department of Rural Development and Land Reform, where we were supposed to drive the transformation process of land and transfer of land, we've had many interactions with them initially. And whilst the idea was 100% right, and we all know we need to get land in the hands of privileged disadvantaged people, the execution was unfortunately failed. And at their own admission, at the stage when we met with them, they had already expensed 4 billion, of which 90% was failures. So we unpacked to see why did it fail, and it all started with the first thing of awarding standalone grants, and the grant being in the form of land. They allocated land to individuals or to groups without any further support. No financial support, no technical support, no back office support. You well know that any form working capital and needs finance for movable assets to make it a success. And Michael specifically touched on it. You know, you can't just put somebody on land and expect them to farm. There needs to be skills and knowledge and know-how. Farming is very specialized and specific these days. So just awarding land is not the solution. The next issue we picked up was the land allocation process. We specifically asked, but how did you identify the successful applicants? And it was a process. They had something like 7 committees that looked at business plans. But the fact is, those business plans, paper and Excel spreadsheets are extremely patient. You can put anything on paper and make it look good. The fact is, or the question is always, do you have the necessary skills, the ability, and the track record to make a success of this business? And the long and the short, unfortunately, was that land was allocated to groups and individuals that simply did not have the skills or expertise to make a success of farming. One thing that Dave touched on as well, which we picked up, is that there was a huge lack of monitoring. Dave mentioned how they are actively involved in monitoring the process and driving the cash flow subsequent to the funding. And that was also lacking in many of these projects. There were no post-disbursement monitoring. And unfortunately, part of any sound financial decision is to make sure that you have a post-disbursement monitoring process to ensure things run smoothly and to intervene or support whenever necessary. The other thing also touched on was that commercial finance, I'll get to the non-amicable relation now, that I think is less important. The commercial finance for development transactions simply does not work. You can't take commercial finance with strict credit rules and solely apply to development finance. There has to be a link between grant finance and commercial finance, and it has to come as a package. Grants were awarded separately from the terms and conditions of commercial finance. And there also seems to be an expectation in the market at times when it seems to be that people look at banks and say, but you must come up with the solutions. Banks have commercial finance that has to be run by commercial rules. The moment you start relaxing sound credit rules for commercial finance is the moment that the bad debts start. So sound credit principles must also always apply when it comes to commercial finance. Ability to repay beyond reasonable doubt and collateral in case of default. And in many of these transactions, both of those lack. Finance for emerging farmers needs to be supported by DFI type financing. And this has been mentioned. I mean, Humpy mentioned it just now. You have to have patient and cheaper patient terms and cheaper funding to support the developing farmer. And then, the expectation of quick results and successes. You know, the ability to farm, the South African farmers are renowned worldwide, the commercial farmers, for being some of the best in the world. But one must realize that their ability to farm has been handed down over generations. There's no quick fix. You simply can't do 1 or 2 diploma courses and then think you can farm. It has to be transferred. There has to be a process of skills development and skills transfer, which as Dave explained in his session, it seems that they are successful in doing. So there's no quick fix. There has to be patience in order to make sure that the previously disadvantaged person is properly skilled and there's a proper knowledge transfer. Can I have the next slide, please? So what are the common success elements that we've picked up in the successful emerging farmers? Firstly, the strong collaboration between commercial and emerging farmers. There where you find a strong bond between the commercial and the emerging farmer, you'll find success. The identification of suitable candidates, that brings me back to the previous point where I said you need to see where the individuals have skills and ability to farm. And unfortunately, a lot of this only comes with a track record. How else do you determine whether this person has the skills or the ability? And you need the commercial farmer to identify these successful developing farmers. Typically, they come from people that's worked on the farm for a long time and that show strong management and farming skills. And then, of course, the alignment of interest there, where the emerging farmer and the commercial farmer wants to achieve the same common goal, the long-term goal. And there has to be a reasonable split of risk and rewards. You can't expect one party in a partnership to take all the risk and then take all the reward, or one taking risk and other one taking reward. There has to be a split of that. And then my favorite one, the blended finance combination. The successful projects have been one where there's a strong grant component to assist the previously disadvantaged person with their share of the capital needed in the project, and then the commercial finance that comes in support of the working capital and the movable assets. The reason why I say it must never be standalone, grants must stand alone from commercial finance, is Capital Office of Commercial Finance is always going to protect our commercial finance. So I'm going to make sure that through our post-disbursement monitoring process, we look after our commercial finance, and automatically we look after the grant as well, because if the project is successful, then the allocation of the grant was successful. Next slide, please. So our view, in terms of the key success factors, and this runs down to the bottom of the summit, I guess, is where will we comfortably place our money, our commercial funding? It's typically in the more mega farming projects. They have bigger impact, and the mega farmer has more means to support the developing farmer. We live, unfortunately, in a world where agriculture is moving to size. The smaller farmer is struggling. I mean, small commercial farmers struggle to survive, let alone that they can transform and upskill and do all the right things in terms of the transformation movement. So we tend to move towards the bigger projects that can have bigger impact and where the support is wider. We also look at strong, or let me rather say, the most successful project that we have funded is where the commercial farmer is part of the solution, takes the risk. We've had projects where we've had commercial mentoring. So it's a 100% black-owned project, and then you just have a commercial mentoring. And then there's no skin in the game. The commercial farmer must also have a lot to lose if the project fails. So we prefer to finance projects where the previously disadvantaged group has a significant stake, but the commercial farmer also has skin in the game to lose. So to make sure that they ensure that there's sufficient skills transfer, management transfer, technical support to make the project a success. Combination of grant and commercial finance, I've touched on that. We used our allocation of the jobs funding grant, which we received as funding to the previously disadvantaged person to put in their share into the project. It comes interest-free and it comes with no repayment terms. In other words, it's their equity that they put in the project. And then the commercial finance we put in via the commercial farmer. But the responsibility is jointly to make sure that that is repaid. We find that the more successful projects is where you have a specific individuals that are identified with strong management skills and that can take the responsibility. Just allocating land to a group of people without having a strong management group typically fails. You want to see individuals that have those management skills and farming skills that come forward. And then very important, you'll see I say exit agreement for the commercial farm over time. That links to my previous point of alignment of goals. If we want to transfer land and get it in the hands of previous disadvantaged persons, there needs to be an exit arrangement for the commercial farmer over time. Once skills have been transferred, once we know that the knowledge has been transferred, and once we're comfortable the project can work, there needs to be a mechanism to transfer the remaining portion of land to the previously disadvantaged person to make land transformation a true success. And Theo, that's it from my side.
Fons, thank you very much. Informative and practical. I think the key for me was the interest needs to be aligned. And that means that everybody must have some skin in the game and must have a share or a benefit in the successful outcome. Fons, thank you very much for your time. I think it was very practical, and I enjoyed when you talk about personal experiences, and I think that takes the discussion forward. So Fons, thank you very much. Thanks for your participation.
Thanks, Theo.
Our next speaker is from Kisby. It is Warren Wheatley. Now, Warren is a chartered accountant with vast experience in institutional consulting and actuarial business. He is notably part of the senior leadership at Kisbey, a joint undertaking whereby Arena Holdings, 4AX Debt Services, and other key partners are seeking to assist SMEs struggling to survive to access capital and other resources. Warren, welcome, and thank you for your participation.
Good morning, Theo. It's very nice to see you in a different environment. Could someone please give me permission to share my screen? I'm just trying to see. Good. All right, I've got it. Hopefully everyone can see. Thank you. I'm very honored to be part of this group. Thank you to the Beyond COVID team for inviting Kisbey. Listening to the previous presentations, I was both encouraged and dismayed. You know, we thought we had come up with the secret formula, but it seems everyone else has come up with similar solutions. But on the other hand, that's quite encouraging to see we on the same road. And the demand for this kind of work is so deep that I think there's more than enough room, and we need as many hands on deck. The Kisbey Fund, quite simply, the word Kisbey is the English name for the life ring that is thrown to people who are out at sea, struggling to stay afloat, and it's thrown to you to survive. And that's what we've tried to structure in terms of our funding solutions to SMEs, and why we have become a natural fit for the Beyond COVID team. Kisbey has designed a unique integrated solution to solve a complex growth funding problem. We've identified the very same issues that almost every other speaker has mentioned today. What we've done is we've put together some media assets. These are media assets owned by the Arena Holdings Group. These titles include the Sunday Times, the Vrye Weekblad, Financial Mail, Business Day, a number of radio stations, and those. And quite simply, the role of the media is to encourage, firstly, it's two specific items. It's to encourage two-way communication between ourselves and the SMEs. But secondly, one of the major components, the Arena Group, as part of its contribution, will be offering discounted advertising packages to these SMEs who become part of our ecosystem. We believe quite strongly that that money is not enough to solve the problem. And these guys need to be able to access advertising and share and grow their market share. Because we want to deploy these solutions at scale, we've had to deploy and use and make use of technology, so that's there. We've included an experienced team of partners, asset managers, there's a 4AX stock exchange, and a number of experts in this area. And those are needed to construct the financial engineering required. And I've also put together quite an exciting leadership team who sit as the IC. The sum of all these parts is an SME loan whose goal is to promote growth within these SMEs. So what is the conundrum? I'm not going to bore you with this because it's been discussed at length, but quite simply, we identified that venture capital investors cannot provide enough capital to scale. And quite importantly, they typically take too much of the ownership of the enterprise. Bank credit models are not designed around a growth capital, and they focus on historic performance and your current balance sheet status. We've tried to look at what an SME today needs to be able to access funding. And it's quite clear that with balance sheets having been ravaged as a result, not only of COVID, but just the general economic malaise in the country, that, you know, the old credit scoring models would just not work. And then on the other extreme, private equity, under these circumstances, you'll find that you end up giving most of your business away. So we've come up with a solution based, that's called revenue-based financing, and it doesn't require heavy covenants from the entrepreneur. We don't take a seat on your board. There's no fixed interest payments. Our interests are very, very succinctly aligned because our payment depends on you growing your revenue. And then, of course, there's added value that assists you in growing your business. So typically how revenue investing works, we provide a convertible loan up to 30% of your annualized revenue. There's no set interest payment. Interest payments are typically 2% of revenue pre-conversion. And because we've given you this soft loan, we ask for a 1% trail fee after you've nursed your business back to health. Depending on the risk, the principal is either paid in year 3 or year 5. And at your election or the SME's election, that loan can either be settled through conversion to equity, or hopefully at that point in time, you're able to access formal capital markets and you can access a bank loan to repay the facility. This slide just talks to some of the differences between the various options out there to an SME. We are the missing middle, and this just talks through some of the major differences. That's what the payment profile looks like over a 14-year period. Initially, it's 2% of revenue, which translates, if you want to compare to an annual interest rate, to around 7% per annum, which is just below prime at the moment. What it doesn't rely on is any strong balance sheet covenants. We just need you to have the potential for growth and a positive revenue line. So this is just another graphic representation of where we fit in. Revenue-based financing sort of fits in just after being bootstrapped or VC angels have assisted. And we play a role all the way up until you're an established enterprise. Again, to some of the investment criteria, these are very broad broad guidelines, and we work in with BeyondCOVID to address this problem for the specific market, and we'll be discussing and releasing that solution in the next few weeks. Again, we've set up and we've understood that in order to reverse engineer the solution, and that solution to our mind was a loan that would facilitate growth, which means we can't charge exorbitant interest rates, and we can't do these predatory loans that are in excess of 2 to 3% per month. We genuinely want to make sure that there's rehabilitative capital and growth capital made available to SMEs. To that end, we've understood that the capital mix needs to be structured so that you can lower the cost of capital made available. And so reverse engineering and understanding where that capital needs to come from, we've understood that we need gearing by way of debt. We need some equity investors who can put in what we call impact or first loss capital. We're talking to international guarantors. And of course, we also trying to access any grants or philanthropic funds that are available both locally and internationally. The role of each of the capital providers, the grants, it lowers the risk for the overall portfolio. And any grants we receive, the benefit of which is passed straight through to the SME, which lowers the cost of capital. Impact equity, this lowers risk to the impact debt providers, and it allows for gearing of the portfolio, which is very important as well. The impact debt component increases the size and it scales the size of the fund through leverage. Simply put, in English, it just means we are able to help a lot more people. That's our Kisby Investment Committee. Mark Barnes is our chairman. He was the former CEO of the post office and an established, distinguished career in financial markets. And no one understands the pitfalls and the flaws in the system better than he does. And then the team is made up of various industry experts who each contribute something in their own way. It's set up as for those in the finance world, it's not really relevant, but it's set up in a traditional, what they call income and deed partnership. This is structured so that we can access institutional assets in a platform that they are comfortable with. And this is the partnership structure, our various service providers. We've got a debt administrator called Rainfin. Our fund manager is called Alwani. The credit process is done professionally through 4AX Debt Services and our Reg 28 and unitization, or in other words, some of the investment reporting that big institutional investments require is done through a company called 274 Life. Theo, that's my presentation. We hope that this solution gives guys some hope. We still attending to our first close, so we're not open for business just yet. The moment we are, though, that announcement will be done through the normal Beyond COVID platforms. So that's it. I think I did my 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Warren. That's certainly what for me was the most interesting, is the fresh approach. And I do think that although some of the elements you note were discussed by the previous speaker, I think you have some elements that for me is incredibly fresh. It's a new way of looking at it. And I think that's where we need to look at. We need to move away from purely asset-based principles to perhaps in your case, a bit more of a revenue income-based principle. Warren, all the best. And I sincerely look forward to the closing and look forward to the information around that. And I wish you all the best. I think that if everything goes well, you might just be more successful than you think. All the best, Warren.
I hope so. And thanks, Lings and the team for the invite. Enjoy the rest of your conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, it's now my pleasure to hand over to Lings Naidu. And this is for the roundtable discussion on solving the bankability question. Lings, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Theo. So, and we can move on to the next slide, Jeff. So I know that, so that would be the table, Jeff, that introduces the breakout session topics. So I know that we've been very much in listening mode so far in the summit, and it's very important for us to get the discussion going as well. Now we know that within the time frame of a conference, there isn't, as much opportunity for us to engage and introduce our thinking into the conference. So this really is our opportunity to do that. What we would like to do is pick up on 4 topics in particular. So these topics are all related to the concept that we've introduced and central to the summit itself. So we all know the summit is focused on how do we go about making emerging farmers, SMMEs farmers bankable. I talked through the concept of big, small farmers. Etienne would have referred to that as agri-SMME collectives. They're really the same thing. They're all about getting smaller farmers to band together so they get the economies of scale and to partner with a larger farming corporate, so that you have the economies of scale to get the cheaper inputs and be able to access the bigger market. So the 4 roundtable topics that we have that we'll be entering into shortly, they all relate to the concept of the big small farm. We have 4 roundtable discussions. They will be facilitated by myself, Etienne, Matt, and Devin, who are all part of the BeyondCOVID team. We encourage everyone to take the opportunity to put your view on the table with regard to the topics for each of the roundtables. We've allocated 20 minutes for the breakout sessions, the roundtable discussions. We know it's not a lot. We see this as the first step in ongoing engagement with all of the key stakeholders in the agri sector. If I could please ask participants in the roundtable to please keep your comments to 1 to 2 minutes to give everyone an opportunity to speak up. The facilitators will run the sessions. They will be making notes during the course of the discussion. And then once the breakup roundtable discussions come to a close, the short sessions, what we will do is the facilitators will come back and provide some key points that were covered in those discussions. So Sage, Jeff, I think we can break out into our groups now. We've assigned the groups randomly. Hopefully we have a decent spread of people in each of the sessions. And as I said, please, I know that the groups are going to be quite large, but please don't be afraid to unmute yourself and throw your comment or your observation or your question into the mix.
Well, thank you very much. I hope you are all back. Certainly, the session that I was involved in was extremely informative, extremely lively, and I think there was some serious valuable input. So from my point of view, I was very comfortable. I think it was a great session, great inputs. Links, would you like to add anything?
Certainly. Thank you so much for that, Theo. I know in the breakout session, the roundtable discussion that I was in, had the participants raised some really insightful points. The topic that we were given or allocated was how can the private sector, for example, CSR and enterprise development programs, support the big small farms that we are saying can make a big difference in terms of the performance of the agricultural sector. I took some freehand notes, which you will see appear on the screen at the moment. I'm going to just give you a general sense of the discussion in the session, and then I'm going to ask Zafrullah and Fans to come in on 2 particular points that were quite pertinent. I think the common theme that we picked up through the roundtable discussion is that at the moment, the agricultural sector, at least the people in our session, didn't have any notable examples of contributions from large corporates through corporate social responsibility or enterprise development programs. A lot of the discussion that happened in our breakout group was really around the importance of the agricultural sector operating as private entities, private sector entities, for the sector to actually support itself. And I thought there were 2 good examples that were quoted. Zafrullah, maybe if I can call on you to start with, if we can unmute Zafrullah. Zafrullah, I thought it was quite a good example that you related as a SMME farmer that is part of the CERNIC group program that we heard about earlier, operating, if I remember correctly, at Tier 4. And your views with regard to how these programs can be helpful for other farmers as well going forward. So Zafrullah, if it's possible for the team to unmute Zafrullah, I'd just like him to come in quickly to talk quickly through his experience.
Zafrullah, we've given you permissions to unmute. Hello.
Hi, Zafrullah, you on?
Am I on? Thank you. Thank you, Links. Now, my experience with the SMME group, you know, we've been taken through a study course with CERNIC. You know, it was a 8-month schedule of going to study groups once 1 week every 8 consecutive months, up to 8 months, and then you graduate to the NQF4. That makes you a tier 3 farmer. Now, at the end of the day, you get the 35 female animals with 1 bull, and then you have to share 40% of the offspring back to CERNIC in order for them to grow their herd as well, because, you know, there's a lot of other emerging farmers that can also benefit from the program, which I feel, you know, it's really very beneficial, especially to smaller farmers. In fact, CERNIC has also got a custom feeding system whereby people that does not have the land, the younger generation especially, they on a custom feeding program whereby some of the calves that we return back to CERNIC gets fed on the CERNIC premises. And at the end of the day, once CERNIC buys it from them or sells it on their behalf, they share the profits. They deduct whatever it costs them to feed it to a certain weight. That prepares them ready for slaughter. And that's also one way of uplifting the younger generation and getting them on board into the farming business. But coming back to the compliance for growing your farm, you know, Links, I'm busy. I'm 15 years on this farm, 15 years of my life. And as I mentioned earlier, it really has become an art to survive on this farm. Because, you know, without the title, I mean, you can ask any farmer, I'm talking about the older generation, the white farmers. They have access funding because they own the title deed of the farm. Now, as I said earlier, we just don't want the handouts all the time. We've got the skills. I know of a lot of farmers. I mean, one of our very successful farmers is Keith Middleton. I remember he's also said he's also had a contributed to your program. Mm-hmm. You know, you can take those type of farmers that's very keen. He's very passionate about his farm. He's very proud of his farm, but he can't move. He can't grow. That is why sometimes you think of taking in a white farmer, but that's also not allowed because of your contract with the government. Now they leave you there. They support you. They had a recap program that they just not going any further with a recap program because I think they've realized it just does not work. But if we can have more support from all these institutions, financial institutions, with a lower degree of compliance, for instance, you know, I don't say we need the handouts all the time, but what can be done is just support us, join us up with the mega farmers, like for instance, Mr. Serfontein and Pietro and them. They're doing a good job with the CERNIC program. If we can get some sheep farmers that does the same thing. I mean, I'm sitting with 4,400 hectares, and that farm has got so much of potential. Wow. I mean, I'm a Muslim farmer. I've got the market for the Qurban unit. It's a certain time of the year that the Muslim, every household, if they can afford it, slaughter 1 or 2 sheep. I'm getting inquiries from the Eastern Cape, the Western Cape, Gauteng, everywhere else. But because I'm undercapitalized, my growth is limited. So if I can join up with some bigger mega farmer, I mean, with a 4,500 hectare farm, I mean, we can easily stock up with the feedlot, maybe 4,000, 5,000 sheep. But the market is there. I mean, the one gentleman, very important. If you don't have the market, don't even go into the farming business. Because some people have actually tried. Some people have actually tried, you know. At the end of the day, they sit with the product, but then they don't have the market. But that's basically, you know, compliance for finance, very critical. Links. You know,
Zafrullah,
thank you.
Thank you so much for that contribution, Zafrullah. And I think the theme that is coming through there is what the private sector really needs is collaboration, fun. You know, others in the group also had some really good examples to share. I think let's leave the discussion on private sector there. I'll hand over to Matungwe. Matungwe, I know you guys discussed the opposite side of the coin, which is how can government come to the party to make big, small farms work?
Thank you, Links. I hope I'm audible now.
You are.
Okay, great. So in our group, our key question was what can be done to massify youth participation in agriculture, and more specifically in agri-SMME collectives. And there were a couple of good inputs that came through around that topic. So one of the key things that came out was that we needed to build trust, and this is trust between the younger people and the older people, and that there's a need to co-create public value partnerships and socially innovative types. So starting small and building up and creating successes that can be showcased. So there are several models for small scale farming that can be looked at in order to enable younger people to realize and see that there are opportunities and successes in farming that can be replicated and scaled up. It was one of the things that came up. And also that, there needed to be training on and information sharing in order to ensure that farming is not seen as what it used to be, and that it can be seen more broadly as, that there are different aspects to it, that it's not just about putting seed in the ground, and that there are several aspects to farming across the farming value chain. And people might have interest not in, being on top of the tractor, but actually, working in the office within a farm, or doing other aspects of farming, or be it logistics or whatever. And that there needed to be reprofiling of farming, and there were a number of points that came out in regard to reprofiling of farming to appeal to the youth. Some of the aspects related to bringing back school gardens, and also backyard gardens within communities, that each homestead have and work its backyard garden, but also start to showcase successes in farming to encourage the youth that is actually not it's not work for older people, as has been the case now. Whenever you look at any publication or any magazine that talks to farming, there's always an older person who looks very tired, and that is the sort of packaging or profiling that is associated with farming, and that needed to change. And then on the education and training side of things, there were also a number of factors that came through, that the education and training system needed to focus. Previously, it has mainly focused on farming as being about farm work and farm management, that the agricultural colleges and universities as well needed to focus on creating farm owners, and not just farm workers and farm managers, that there needed to be entrepreneurship that is brought into the education and training, and that there needs to be some research on the willingness of larger farmers to assist the youth or aspirant farmers with experience across the entire farming value chain, so they can understand, build confidence, and be in a position to can manage and run their own farms. And that it starts actually with educating young people that food comes from the soil, and the soil is the basis for wealth. And once there is that understanding that vegetables do not come from Woolies or from ShopRite, that they actually come from the farm and comes from the soil, and that could be a good basis for that understanding, and inculcating it in people to understand, or the youth to understand, that they can actually be involved in creating the food and being wealthy through a creation of making of food. And that the education and training system needed to focus on producing good employers. I've already touched on that. And that I've also touched on this issue of mainstreaming agriculture education, that it needs to be one of the subjects that is taught across the entire education and training system, and it's not an elective that people can choose whether to do it or not. The issue of land did come up, and that young farmers should be able to own their land, and that there should be all the other associated services, including services that are provided under the BeyondCOVID umbrella, pooling of marketing, mentoring, logistics, and other support services that can be provided to younger farms to really break the barriers to entry and make it sustainable. Obviously, the issue of funding came up, and I would have liked for Mashudu, I think, to be unmuted to talk briefly about that. I think he might be connected under Matungwe. He spoke about providing funding of young entrepreneurs. He's involved in agriculture himself, and he's spoken to some of the challenges that is faced, and how those how barriers can be broken in relation to funding. Is it possible to unmute him?
All right, cool. Thanks, Matung. Yeah, so my contribution to this whole discussion was basically to say, most of us walk this journey without really having much of the initial capital required. We get into it, we borrow from money from uncle, grandma, mother, whoever and wherever you can get the money. And realize as well that we're not trained in this space, but we find it, we stumble onto it. And a typical example that I would give, which I omitted to give earlier, a few years back, we had a problem that we couldn't find young, employable, insurance-minded people. And it was such a problem to the point that we had to go to INSETA and initiate training programs, to the point that we have flooded the market with underwriters, claims people, executives that are sitting in various aspects of insurance. I'm taking the same approach here in the farming space. We don't all want to put seeds in the ground. Some of us want to rear chickens. Some of us want to package and market and sell on. Some of us want to carry crates full of these chickens to townships to sell to those magogos and anyone else that prefers to slaughter their own live chicken. So there's many aspects to it. The one place where I've found to be the common area where we've all met when we are traveling this journey is we've all sought funding. We've all gone to banks, we've all gone to NEFs, and now I'm realizing that there are these initiatives that the IDC is putting together. And it makes sense for us to have gone there because that's where their funding comes from. But we've all been rejected to some extent. So in order for us to then take a step back and say, the guys that are interested in farming, what were they pursuing? What were the ideas that they were bringing forward? What sort of funding requirements did they have? If you go to a bank, you will find a list of business plans that are sitting in file 18 or whatever the garbage bin is called nowadays. That's somebody that's set and profiled and researched and put together a decent business plan, but they got rejected because they didn't have enough money of their own to put into the business plan. The IDCs, they should have the same. The NEFs, they should have the same. If we were to pull all those and we started to look to say, who is interested in farming? That for me gives you an answer of who is interested in farming. And a lot of us are doing it without land. We are leasing. We are basically just making it work because it's within us to make it work. So I suspect that it will require a bit of work, but at the same time, it will answer a very, very big question that we all sit with. Making farming sexy, I'm already past the schooling age. I'm not going to go back and sit there and wait for it. The guy that I was when I was at schooling age, I was chasing the big corporate chair. I wanted to be the executive somewhere, and I did achieve that, but the fulfillment was not there. So if you take it back to schooling, you're going to miss a whole lot of us. If you are trying to get us interested in farming at that level, chances are you're going to find us thinking about the BMWs and every other car that you can think of. So look for us in places where we've all gone to, but we got rejected. And that is your typical funding houses for banks and stuff. So that's my contribution to it. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We're running slightly late in terms of our time schedule, so I'm going to quickly ask Etienne just to run through your session very, very quickly and give us just broadly speaking the synopsis in terms of your session.
Okay. Thank you, Theo. And we'll make this very quick. And it ties on very nicely with the gentleman that just shared his Malays with us. The process is too hard. Whether you go to government and to a lesser degree, whether you go to the private sector for money, the actual process to get there, the time and the effort and the hoops you need to jump is so demanding that lots of farmers just actually abandon, you know, the road. And that's a major stumbling block in actually engaging with willing, able, and talented farmers, because they are small. They don't have time to sit in offices forever and a day and do 1 million forms. They actually got farms to look after, and they can't. So they abandon the process. The second thing that's hugely important is there needs to be acknowledgement for the sheer effort of farming. Even with training, there's no quick successes, and it requires a long-term commitment from from all the stakeholders, government and the private sector people involved as well. It's not a flavor of the day program. You start this thing, you're going to be in it for 10 years. You're not a commercial farmer in 2 or 3 years. It's a long-term process. Government and private sector must stay committed. Then a last thing that I quickly want to focus on is we need to look at the non-farming part of it as well, the agro-processing as well as the marketing. And it's important to rope in academia in that process as well. The Tshwane University of Pretoria, offered and asked to become involved in this process for this very reason. And, looking at the downstream part of the process, it's also important to look at the distribution side of the produce. There is an issue with spaza shops that service a massive constituency. And the small farmers in the more distant areas where large corporates don't necessarily operate would want that partner to help them distribute. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Short and sweet, but still rich in content and rich in principal points. Thank you very much, Etienne. I'm going to last ask Devon, your grouping. Can you run it through in 2 or 3 minutes, since we're starting to lag a bit in time, and I think some of the very important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I will. Thanks, Theo. I will be 1 minute. How about that? And I won't touch on. I won't go into detail on everything. But there were, I think, some very valuable insights that our participants brought to the table. The question for our group was, what types of funding will agri-SMME collectives require? And in our group, we did have a combination of smaller farmers, bigger farmers, but also someone like Andre Milan from Landmark. Some of the key points that were raised was, when you are asking the question, what types of funding is required, look at the barriers to entry that farmers face. Focus on, use that as your starting point. Look at the barriers to entry and trace the value chain, and that will guide your answers. We know, I think there's already a big body of information when we ask this question, what types of funding is required. We know that things like seeds and fertilizers are required by farmers. But what the conversation, I think, pointed out is that there are some nuances that need to be borne in mind. For example, we need quality inputs. Mr. Milan was pointing out that in some projects, seeds and fertilizers may have been contributed to as a project, but they weren't of the right quality. The other perspective to bear in mind is flexibility surrounding funds that are provided to farmers. For example, we need to bear in mind that we can't just plant crops whenever we want to plant crops. That needs to be informed by the right seasons, by the right soil, by the right conditions, by the right geography. So any conditions attached to funding that is provided to these initiatives, it needs to account for that. One of the major concerns that was cited is, how do you move from that startup phase to being a commercially viable farmer? And I think that's really the crux of a lot of the conversations. We had a few people say that you ask, I'm going to paraphrase very poetic license, you ask me what type of funding I need. Any type of funding at the moment. The doors are closed at the moment, and this is really what we need to do. We need to open up those doors and make sure that the funding is accompanied with the right level of knowledge as to where to use it, how to use it. And I think I'll stop there in the interest of time. Thanks, Theo.
Thank you very much, Devin. Thank you. I think it's very valuable and viable points. And I think I want to thank everybody that participated in this breakout group. I think it was interesting. It was certainly the kind of feedback that I think we were hoping for, and the kind of feedback that will take this process forward. The next agenda item is de-risking and corporatizing communities. And our speaker is Mashego Maleka. Now, Mashego is managing member of the Zenzele Tech Incubator, or ZTI, an incubator focused on developing entrepreneurs from novice to fully competent key players with commercially viable entrepreneuring projects. And I would like to introduce Mashego. We are looking forward to your contribution. And again, thank you very much for making the time available. I think this is a key element that needs to be addressed, and I look forward to your contribution. Mashego.
Thanks, Theo. Colleagues, thanks for everything. You've covered most of the things that are out there. Trust is the most biggest thing that is out there to get anything going, any partnership, anything to move. And where we are moving from is as rural communities. You've been mentioning the word emerging farmers. And then when you look at it, we've been emerging from 1994. So we cannot just be emerging, we rather be looked as resource poor farmers. If you look at us as resource poor farmers, and then of course, before 1994, we were able to feed ourselves, we were working on our land and everything was happening nicely. And then until things happened. Now, we need to start creating trust. And where we need to start creating trust, the first thing is you realize that the land itself is known that is belonging to that chief, but that chief doesn't have the title deed. The title deed is sitting with the South African Development Trust. The land reform process of South Africa is quite on that, and that created a trust deficit between the traditional leaders and the government. And if it creates that, so we have started a process of transferring the title deeds. We looked into the whole thing to understand what can we do to get the whole thing going. And then another thing that we're looking at is how do we start to create a 50-year visioning exercise for the traditional leaders. Then if we create that kind of a visioning exercise, then in that we'll be able to say, how do we backcast from a 50-year vision until today? In that way, then we start to having a bigger horizon, and then in this big horizon, we are in a better position to do everything that we need to do. And then to create that trust between us and all the stakeholders that are coming into the traditional leaders area, we need to create an organizational climate. And the organizational climate that is conducive for development, conducive for that, and then that creates a system where how do we use our land to a maximum potential? And then to do that, we need to be working with a whole load of other people, including commercial farmers, academia, and then the schooling system. How do we make sure that we instill agriculture within the schooling system? How do we understand the maximum, how can we maximize the potential of our land? And in our mixed farming, as you walk through a lot of traditional leaders area, is you realize that we're doing livestock and crops. And at times we are combining them as that. And then when you look at our livestock, the way it's going, it's not going the way it should be, because they just walking, hoping to find food and everywhere. If they just walking, our animals are walking to find food anywhere, how do we bring them to be able, how do we now create a system for them to be able to do that? And that's why then integrated planning is required, where we're saying that the key thing to do this is the spatial development framework. Our municipalities are non-existent in traditional leaders. So the spatial development framework and town design and the right zoning, that will have to go into this thing. It will actually help to get the whole thing down. How do we make sure that we could get return on our assets? I mean, we've got land that we cannot use properly. So the key thing is, how do we create wealth and jobs for everybody to be able to enjoy what is happening? We would love to be able to establish proper infrastructure. The government is talking a lot about it, but nothing is happening. So from the traditional leaders' point of view, we would like to see create our system whereby we create our own roads, we create electricity, irrigation infrastructure, all that is required to support farming, because in that way, then things will be okay. However, we understand that we're living in a democratic constitutional society whereby we cannot do these things without integrating them into the spatial development framework of the municipalities. Next slide, please. To do that, now, we came with a model of establishing community development agencies, so that when we corporatize the communities, you realize that under normal conditions, you'll find a traditional council sitting there, and other circumstances, you'll find a community development trust there. But both of them, there's not enough capabilities in terms of taking the development that is required properly. So our model says the traditional council, its role should be looking into the general administration of the area. If they're looking into the general administration of the area, we need to establish this development agency. This development agency is the one that will be able to say, how do we maximize the land? Where should housing be? All the zoning that is required to maximize the land. And by so doing, then, how do we do the agronomy requirements on this land? And then to do that, that's what we need to do. And to do that, that's where we need to be working properly with agriculture corporates, and also we're working with these agriculture corporates, and also the academia, and all other stakeholders, including retired farmers that are out there. We're making an appeal to all of them to come on board to be able to do that. And the agro-processing, we believe that we are the biggest markets. If we are the biggest markets and the cost of food is if we produce in where we're sitting and process it until it's ready for the kitchen, then in that way, the cost of food will be cheaper, because if you look at some of the things, some of the food from Limpopo, things are produced in Limpopo, come into Joburg, into a distribution center in Joburg, and still come back to my own home. You realize the travel that the food has taken into the whole thing. So therefore, what we're looking at is, how do we create that facility whereby we say, when the corporate comes to a traditional leader, when anybody comes, this is what we need to do. This is the business plan that we've made for the area. This is the vision and everything that we've got. What are your inputs? And we acknowledge that the inputs on everybody that comes on board will be able to reshape our visions and making sure that everything is working as it should. And to do that, we believe that working with agriculture, corporates, government, and everybody that is all the stakeholders within our jurisdiction, we should be able to come with proper vocational training support, whereby we're looking at how do we get a proper agri-tech center whereby the inputs that are required by everybody. We acknowledge that when we engage the agri-corporate, we need to leverage on what is best. Let's say this agri-corporate, like looking at SENIC, will be looking at livestock. If we look at livestock, there will be systems based on the interest of SENIC. But how do we use SENIC to each and everybody who want to use livestock as a hobby, or he want to try it and all that, he can leverage on the expertise of SENIC within our areas. If we look at what GWK has been saying, they will be allocated a piece of ground where they'll be working from there. How do we make sure that each and every person from his backyard and all that, he can benefit from the presence of GWK on site? Then if they presence from GWK on site, then now, therefore, if we all come together, we will be in a position to be able to say, right, this is what needs to happen on this land. Then this is how we create wealth, because we believe that there is this thing in South Africa whereby we really push the creation of jobs. We think that the key thing is, how do we create millionaires? If we create wealth, you cannot have millionaires without jobs. So it's easy also to measure the number of billionaires that came up out of farming, out of agro-processing from the whole area. Then if we do that, then below them, there'll be enough people who will be employed sustainably. And then of course, we also, if you come to our areas where we're sitting as traditional leaders, you realize that if you don't think broadly in that way, then your project will be at risk. Because if you come and establish a project and then without expanding it in such a way that it keeps almost everybody, then it looks as if those few selected there who are part of that project are there to be able to do that. Next slide, please. Now, the whole thing where it's sitting, where you see that bubble beyond COVID, where it's sitting, and then on the left side of beyond COVID is this development agency that we established. We say, when you look at those two, going left is, on the left is community stakeholders. Now, everybody within this community will be able to say, this is what we want to do based on the feasibility study and the visioning exercise that we had, that these are our interests as the community. Then if this is our interest as the community, this is the journey, how we're going to achieve what we require. If this is the journey that we're going to achieve what we require, but how do we achieve what we want to do? Then we've got this community development agency. Within this community development agency, there will be departments. It's not only looking into agriculture, it will also looking into agro-processing. If at all the area has got mining potential, it should be looking, there should be a department looking into mining. If then manufacturing potential, then should be looking into manufacturing, tourism, and also the actual environment, housing, infrastructure, and all that. All those things should be part of the development agency. And this development agency having the vision of the community. If now we've got BeyondCOVID coming with all partners that we're coming up with, we're saying, let's sit down on a round table BeyondCOVID and the community development agencies, the TI, and the community stakeholders to say, right, now we've got SENIC coming on board, we've got GWK on board, coming on board, we've got Jobs Fund coming, we've got everybody coming on board here. How do we create that conducive environment? And creating that conducive environment, one of those things that we have identified is if we've got a smart market, of which we have started to look at, say, how do we write, like now there is this vibe about cannabis-related products, hemp, and all those high-value crops. How now do we start to write on those things? Then we start to engage the markets in terms of the offtakes from the overseas. Then if we engage offtakes from overseas, then those offtakes, then now we say, how do we identify an agri-corporate who understand this offtake? In that way, then we say GWK or any other agri-corporate who is good at that, come and work with us to be able to produce the requirement of this market. And in that way, we believe that if we create land, we bring the agri-corporate in to come and work on the requirements of the market, and then working on the requirements of the market, all of us, including traceability, where do we put control points in terms of compliance with good agriculture practices and all those local ones and global ones. And then if we put them together, then it makes life easy for everybody. And to do that, we now say, when of course we started to engage the academia, we say to BeyondCOVID and all those partners that how now we've got a lot of unemployed graduates. And when you look at those main unemployed graduates, we find out what's happening about them. Their problem is don't have necessary practicals. Now we say we've got enough tracts of land as traditional leaders, whereby then this academic students from doctoral to undergraduates, they can come on board and be able to do practicals on our land. And we say, BeyondCOVID, here we are with the communities, they are being de-risked, the corporate structures that we're establishing in the development agency that will create a conducive environment. With that, thank you, Theo.
Thank you very much, Mashego. I think this is it's a great invitation. I think it's certainly an invitation worthwhile exploring. And thank you very much for your contribution. I think if you look at the current status of where we are in the country and where we are in the development, certainly I think where you are focusing and the skill set and the ideas you bring to these discussions, I think is very helpful. And I do think that it's a valuable contribution, and it is a key element for any of these projects to be successful. So from my point of view, thank you very much, Mashego. I really enjoyed your presentation. We are now at the point where I am very honored, and we're going to focus on the community requirements and aspirations. And here we specifically invited community leaders. We invited, we are going to be joined by 3 of the chiefs, and I must say it is an honor for me, and I look forward to this part of the conversation. And it is with a great expectation that I introduce our first participant, our first traditional leader, Chief Gwadiso. He is from the Eastern Cape. Chief, thank you very much. Thanks for your time. I look forward to your contribution.
Thank you very much, Jan, and good day to all the participants. Just by the way of introduction, I'm coming from the Eastern Cape, but on the Transkei side. My area of jurisdiction is along the coast, between Umtata the River and Umzimvubu River. That is Port St. John's and Mkandulu, anything in between. That's where I reside. It's a great honor for me to be part of the summit. And thank you very much for thinking about traditional leaders. Our experience is that people, they only come to traditional leaders when they have problems with the communities and do not start with the traditional leaders. Eastern Cape is a province that has got no mines. Our strong backbone is the agriculture. That I am very happy that you people are working on how we can improve on agriculture. What is of importance is for us to re-educate our communities. You know, a lot was promised to our people and very little that has succeeded or realized. We need to motivate our people to work for themselves and not expect handouts. And I want to go back to the point about the youth in agriculture. I want to reiterate it, that agriculture has been downgraded, and that is how it's seen. And for long term, it will be very important for us to go back to the drawing board and make it attractive to the youth, because this is one thing that will never end is agriculture, because as long as you have people, you need food, besides economic interests. Thirdly, in the rural areas, Etienne, let me be honest, very little was done in terms of infrastructure. We need to think about that. For instance, you need to have dams. There's big rivers that are running to the sea here. Mtata River, Bashi River, Umzimvubu, you name it. All those rivers, they run to the sea. That water gets wasted. We need to have dams, especially for irrigation purposes. We need to have irrigation schemes and many other things. But once you do that, now you have laid foundation for agriculture. And we need to study or investigate as to what is that is right for each area. For instance, maize might be a good crop for other areas, but when you get to other areas, it's a total different thing. So that you can maximize yield, you can maximize production, because the climates are not the same. And I'm sure the experts, they know better than I do when it comes to that. In the majority of cases, many people have been taught not to participate. I'll be very happy that if we can really work on getting our people to participate in agriculture. That is what I would like to say so far. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chief. I think it is incredibly important. I do think that your comments about the fact that we need to look broader in terms of including more people, more participants from broader areas, which includes the traditional leaders in finding broader solutions. I do think both from, you talk about the re-education, I also think there is a re-education required as to the role and the possible future roles that traditional leaders can play in solutions, and not only in the narrow aspect that we sometimes think about, but I do think it is a body, or let's say a part of the community that need to play a much bigger role, and there is also an education role if we want to do that. Etienne, I note you are on the line. Would you like to add anything at this point? You're on mute. You're on mute.
Yes, those are the words of 2020 and 2021. I think from our side, from a Beyond COVID side, you know, we understood, and a lot of it's down to, you know, Mashego's thought leadership. We understood that the communities are principals in anything that we undertake. We also understand that you cannot allow large corporate investors and corporations to undertake programs in a vacuum, because a vacuum brings risk. So by having sophisticated development structures in the communities that were shaped by the communities with expert inputs from other parties. It de-risks the projects, it de-risks the underlying position of the financiers, and it creates stability. So we are very excited, we're honored by having this constituency on board. And whenever we start with any program looking at establishing funding, any program, the principals, namely the farmers and the community and the corporates, will always be there as the team.
Etienne, thank you very much, and I agree with those sentiments. We now have Chief Mpahlele. Chief Mpahlele is from the Limpopo province. Chief, again, it's an honor to have you on the line. It's an honor to have you partaking in this, and we look forward to your inputs. There seems to be a Chief Mpahlele. Are you online? Or should we try to assist you while we jump to Chief Langa? Let's move on to Chief Langa. Is also from the Limpopo province. Again, thank you very much for your contribution. In the meantime, we will see from a technical point of view if we can assist Chief Mpahlele, but let me go to Chief Langa. Again, it's a privilege to talk to you. It's a privilege for you to be involved in this. So over to Chief Langa. We're looking forward to your contribution.
Hi there, just an update. I believe that Chief Langa and Chief Mpahlele have dropped off. So while we try to get them back, I think we can move on to Matungu's section on the way forward, and we will circle back if we can.
So thank you very much for that message. I do think it is. I've been in a lot of these discussions, and I do think that is one of the constituents that we sometimes underestimate, and that we underestimate at our own peril. And I welcome the point that Etienne made in terms of any of these projects. We should also discuss it with these constituencies, meaning the traditional leaders. So I'm going to go forward on the assumption that we are not getting Chief Mpahlele and Chief Langa. If they were to come in, just drop me a note. Now the way forward, and I guess that is what a lot of us has been looking forward to. I think these discussions can only be talk shops, and the key is to turn them into real practical activities that will add value, so that if we have this discussion in a year or 2 or 3 time, we talk more about the successes and the projects and the amount of people that we got into the bigger food value chain. So I'm looking forward to it. So Mantungu Chidi, thank you very much. We look forward to your synopsis and your views on how should we move forward from here. Over to you.
Thank you. So I hope I'm both visible and audible. So in terms of a way forward, I mean, we started off the day with Faye opening up the session and, really sharing with us what Beyond COVID is, all the challenges relating to COVID, and identifying issues or sectors that Beyond COVID is interested in and focused on, part of which is the issue of agriculture, I think construction and metals manufacturing as well. And that, this summit is the first of the initiatives that Beyond COVID is focusing on. And we had a couple of speakers who highlighted key successes in several of their agriculture-specific programs that they've been running, be it GWK, KISB, others. And I think they have a really, a common thread of what makes a successful small-scale emerging farmer. And so we are looking at doing now, having considered all the inputs and all the engagements during the round table, is what is the way forward. We have engaged, we have listened to several presentations, we have identified what the barriers are, and we now need to think through what are the next steps, what are we going to be doing going forward. So one of the first few things that we will be working on is the establishment of a panel of qualified support partners to develop what we call an ecosystem. This include organizations involved in enterprise development, in funding, in research, agri-corporates and cooperatives, and also with traditional leaders. As you would have seen, a number of them were present today, and we would like to take the conversation forward, and they can engage with Beyond COVID through the website, www.beyondcovid.co.za. They can also contact Beyond COVID via the email address partnerships@beyondcovid.co.za, and that would really be the start of the engagement around the development of the panel of support partners. Next slide, please. In terms of the small-scale farmers or the emerging farmers or the new generation farmers that are present today, and those that are not but who need assistance, there's immediate access through our website to a number of business support tools. There is a Beyond COVID playbook that can provide you with a lot of immediate tools around and how to navigate the difficult environment, and to ensure that you can be respected, so that you can access our website to access such tools. But you can also register on the website for business support needs analysis through info@beyondcovid.co.za. So all the farmers can do that. I think one common thread that we have spoken to is the issue of a agri collective, and in order for us to be able to start getting those collectives together across common crops and all of that, we will need people to come on board and farmers to really engage, so that we can take the process forward. In terms of strategic partnerships, there are obviously partners that are doing similar work. I noticed that there were colleagues from other SADC countries. I noticed people from Lesotho, Mozambique, Angola, and Botswana in the session. And if there are strategic partnerships to be entered into, again, you can engage with us on partnerships@beyondcovid.co.za, or you can go through to our website and see what is available on the website, but also to provide your details so we can take the conversation forward around forming or forging those strategic partnerships. Next slide, please. What we'll be doing next in terms of a campaign is a campaign to access commercial investment grants. I think one thing that came through during the engagement today was the notion of blended funding, that loan funding on itself is not adequate, and that across the different presenters today, there's been an element of grant funding that has been brought on board to enable for support to be in place. And our next campaign is going to be really going through to corporate South Africa and to government to see where there's opportunities for grants that can be accessed to enable the blended fundings which can support the collectives that we'll be working with. So really, as a way forward, those are the areas of or immediate areas of focus for us, and also, so anyone who really wants to get in contact with us can contact us through the website and also through the email addresses that I've spoken to. Thank you, Theo.
Thank you very much. Before we close off, I believe that Tsakane Pila is with us to talk on behalf of Chief Langa. So before I close off the session, Tsakane, can you please come online? We look forward to you talking on behalf of Chief Langa.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm not sure if I am audible. Am I audible?
You are indeed audible and we can see you. So carry on, please.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tsakane Pila, as it has already been indicated. I am a resident of Hapila under the headman Lisibana Philippos Pila, led by the Honorable Chief Masebe Langa of Mapela. Mapela has got a total of 42 villages. Firstly, let me take the opportunity to congratulate the organizers for this summit, recognizing that farming is one of the most important pillars that can take us beyond COVID. I want to say that one common macroeconomic factor that affects us all is that of unemployment. Day in, day out, you see young brothers and sisters that matriculate, leaving the villages, going to look for opportunities within the cities. And you realize that actually there is a lot of unemployment in the cities as much as there is unemployment in the villages. So as I have indicated, in my area or in our area of Mapela, we have a total of 42 villages, a vast amount of land under the Hoshi, and the yards that you have in these villages are equally big. There's absolutely no reason why there has to be migration from the villages to the cities. In actual fact, the opposite must happen. The level of unemployment that can be created by bringing such programs to our Mapela area will be immense. The food production that can be harnessed through such collaboration as the one that I have heard you talking about, it's immense. If you look at my area in Hapila, Sterkwater, we have a pack house that is global, or that is global standard certification. And with projects that you are talking about, we can actually really make or start to make a dent in creating employment for our people and sustainability in the same breath. Hetman Pila and Hoshi Langa really appreciate the initiative that BeyondCOVID is taking. And we are saying it is better to use best practice approach at the moment than do a trial and error in farming. Because, I mean, I have heard a lot of speakers from SENIC, from JWIK, and there's funders here, and there's people that has paid school fees, done the trial and error, and we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We want to use the best practices so that we can actually take our community and our village forward. And we have engaged with companies or consulting companies like ZTI. They came to us, and then we have actually given them a mandate to interact with locals towards this integrated value chain development, including the backyard commercialization of the chief lands. Ladies and gentlemen, the concept of a big small farms remain interesting concept for us, because indeed many are the challenges of the small farmer, and the probability of success as an individual are very tough. So those challenges being put together and someone trying to assist and manage the interaction and all those challenges that can be, it's actually something that we are so much looking forward to. So in those few words, I want to thank you, the organizers of the program, and I think it should be a way forward for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those contributing words. I certainly think that yet again, I am humbled by the fact that so many of the participants are happy to offer solutions, are happy to be part of the long-term solution. So from my point of view, I would just like to thank BeyondCOVID, Faye as the chairperson, and then Mantunga, Etienne, and Links. Thank you very much for this endeavor. As I stated in the opening remark, a successful food producer is an asset to the community, is an asset to the greater community, not only in terms of assisting with food security, but in terms of assisting with development, with closing the gap between those who have and those who have not, creating opportunities and creating an ecosystem that works for everybody. If South Africa can solve the question of land, of food security, of employment, South Africa will be successful. So from my point of view, I want to thank each and every participant. I want to thank everybody for their time. I want to thank everybody for assisting in terms of providing inputs, of taking this debate forward. And I would like to wish BeyondCOVID all the best. And I would look forward to following the success, as I am certain that these endeavors will find fertile ground, and that in the long run, we will all be successful if these endeavors work.